The following program is from NET.
It's Soul, and this is your announcer, Joe Dennis. And tonight on Soul, part 2 of a conversation between James Baldwin and Nikki Giovanni. And here again is the producer of Soul, Ellis Hazel.
Thank you, Joe, and good evening. I'm Ellis Hazel, the producer of Soul, and I welcome you to the second half of this conversation between Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin. As I mentioned last week, we taped this interview in London recently and edited it for showing at this time. You will see and hear two very gifted and much-loved black writers thinking, questioning, and exchanging ideas with all the eloquence and wit and passion that have brought them to national and indeed international prominence. So now let us resume this dialogue, this conversation between Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin.
How do we as a people begin to deal?
What we have
with
to
it?
do is a very difficult uphill job, Nikki. What you have to do is begin to change the basis on which people think. For example, you have to begin to shift the basis of the language, because the way people speak is also the way they think.
Yeah.
And I haven't got to point out to you because you know that the English spoken by black Americans is not the English spoken by white Americans.
Yeah, that's true.
No. And so that's given, and we have to use it and do something with it which has not been done before. You know? Mm-hmm. We are in great trouble, but we have the great advantage of knowing we're in great trouble. You know, we're in trouble man to woman, man to man. We're in trouble, you know, father to son, mother to daughter. But we know we are. If I can liberate my great-nephew, if black people can liberate themselves, and since we're talking about a commercial endeavor, too, by the way, you know, because the great crisis is we have no land and no money.
Well, that's,
you know? But that's all right.
That resides in power.
Yeah, we'll get...
Because you find out you cannot purchase anything you can't take.
We'll get the power.
You know what I mean?
We'll get the power.
You must.
No, we'll get the power.
And the power is not the land or the money.
I know that.
The power is the ability to effect.
But now you are agreeing with me.
Of course. You're wise, man.
What?
You're a wise man, why wouldn't I?
Oh, wow.
No, and one of the strengths of the Afro-American, certainly the last 20, 30 years, is that we have recognized we are not Americans. On one hand. On the other hand, we are the only true inheritors of the place called America.
That's right. It belongs to us.
Because we're still outside of it.
It belongs to us, and there's nobody can do anything about that.
And we will get it. If we continue to move. I think it's a goal.
In ways that one can't quite see yet. We already have it. That's one of the reasons for the panic.
We have to effect it.
Yes.
We have to know it, and we have to make sure that everybody else...
We have to change it.
Sure. It's like the South lost the Civil War, but they didn't know it, which is why they continued until someone finally said, you know you lost. And, oh, did we? You know what I mean? They continued to act as if they had won.
Well, they still haven't lost it, because that war was a kind of... Yeah. The results of that war are being paid for until today.
And will be paid for.
When we marched on Montgomery, Governor Wallace had the Confederate flag flying from the Capitol building,
yes.
Which is legally insurrection. But nobody said a word about it. Because, in fact, the South and North simply concluded a contract between them to keep you and me in slavery.
Yeah.
That's all that really happened. So the textile mills in Massachusetts got rich, and the cotton fields got rich. Where the textiles come from, except for Mississippi.
But see, so many institutions to me, or not but so many institutions, like, it just doesn't make that much difference that Shirley Chisholm is in Congress or Richard Brooke is in the...
Well, it's what I mean when I say, you know, the white and black are really very arbitrary categories which cannot be trusted.
Well, certain things have certain color designations.
Well, the fact that Ed Brooke is a senator from Massachusetts, or we have some black mayors, since it doesn't change the machine, doesn't change the parties which they allegedly represent, doesn't mean anything. I'm saying you can't tell a black man by the color of his skin.
Or maybe you can't tell. Maybe my quarrel is very subtle, but maybe I'm saying you can't tell a white man by the color of his.
Either.
Yeah.
Either. In that case,
Yeah.
there's a great deal of hope.
If you could get a black mayor to come in and change, which I think Carl Stokes did, change the police department, change the way that the city goes about its services, then you could have something. But if he's not going to change it, first of all, the militia, which becomes the police department, if he's not willing to make those kind of changes, or if he's not willing to, let's say, take on the McCarran Act, then he's just not doing black people any...
or the country.
Well,
no.
It's one and the same.
No, it's one. In my mind, it's one and the same.
It's one and the same. Because, well, that's true.
I'm not trying to. I'm not being a missionary trying to save America. But I do know that we have paid too much for it to be able to abandon it.
We can never abandon it. I don't think that that's a question, because where else are we going to go? I mean, nobody else wants us.
Well, in any case, my father and my father's fathers paid too much for it.
I've paid too much for it. I'm only 28.
Yes.
It's not. I deserve it, to do whatever I want to do with it. Thomas deserves it, whatever that means. I just think that, like, how we go about it and what we're, I'm just not interested in many things that people are interested in. I'm not interested in a president or a Congress. I wouldn't care Puerto Rican, you know what I mean? I wouldn't care. I just don't give a damn. Because it's still somebody trying to run my life. I'm not interested in movements and ideologies. Because I think that I would have a difficult time. No matter who was running.
You would have a terrible time.
Yeah, I mean, personally,
I would too.
It wouldn't change one bit for me, except maybe I would even have to go in exile and I can live there now.
Yeah, but you see, that's a tightrope. That's a tightrope that we're on. Again, to come back to the whole question of of labels, white and black. I'm terrified of cultural commissars, on either side of the line.
Yeah.
The
older you get, the more frightening it becomes.
Terrifying, because I'm much too old to be told how to write. Yeah. Or what to write about.
But that's a stupid. My theory is that the world divides into sort of like intelligent and weak and strong, which is awful. I mean, it's really awful for me to say things like that. But there's so many stupid people. It
divides not so much between the stupid and the bright, because most bright people that I've encountered, not most perhaps, but many, are wicked. I really think it, really wicked.
Yeah, well, maybe.
But I think it divides between the people who have a certain kind of daring and the people who don't. And the daring is involved with the price you're prepared to pay for your life. Okay. Because then you may have been born stupid, but if you're willing to live and take your chances on living, you become very bright.
Yeah. But then in my world, that becomes a bright person.
Yes, of course.
Because it's not based on IQ.
No.
That's just, that's like a very weak position people get into when they start. Well, in the States, we have a thing. I don't know how familiar you are with it, but we're going through a whole thing. There is no such thing as individual, which of course is killing the movement. Oh, it's not only not true; it's stupid. It's killing the movement. And when you see the dum-dums perpetuating that, you don't want to be like them. So the very bright people are saying, okay, you all can have. And I hate to watch it happen because it's destroying what was almost at one point a nation.
It's not. Be cool. Be cool. This won't. I'm not trying. I don't mean be tranquil.
Yeah.
But let it go. Don't worry. What you have to do is concentrate on what is essential. And not be sidetracked by very disturbing details. After all, you know and I know that the individual does exist.
Not only does, but should.
In any case, whether or not he should, he does.
I'm concerned about it, I guess, particularly because there's so many young kids who want to believe. And for me, when I look at, like, the energy, I teach school. And when I look at my various classes, the few times that I'm there, and I see those hopeful little faces, and I know that they are just as eager to become, fascists as anything else, that they don't really, what they want is to believe. Then I begin to feel an obligation to say, okay, try believing in yourself.
Yes, but my dear, that's all we've been talking about.
Yes.
You call it power and I call it, you call it power, I call it morals, or you say I do.
No, okay,
but it's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same thing. What one is trying to do is to teach those children something which they will need much, much later, because they can become fascist very easily. Especially if they really believe, that all the legends which are now being fed, you know, that black is beautiful. Black is beautiful. But since it's beautiful, you haven't got to say so. You know,
Or
it's
since
very
it's beautiful,
important.
the ego is the most important thing about exemplifying that beauty.
Because it's a very dangerous slogan. I mean, I happen to, you know, I'm very glad that it came along, because it had to come along. But, you know, I don't love all black people, really, you know.
Okay.
You know, I know some deacons and preachers and congressmen and judges and teachers and lawyers, you know, black, but not like me, you know. Mm-hmm. You know, you're trying to tell the child something which transcends all those categories. So he won't become what you see all around you every day.
One tries.
You know.
But that has to be dealt with because they're constantly being fed that their ego is to be supplemented to what is constantly called the energy, which makes no sense to me. Because why should somebody who doesn't even know you run your life? You know, why should I run some kid's life? And I feel, you know, eminently equipped. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
if I could be, I feel like, wow, I would be the best person. But why should I do that? Why can't you do it? You can make your own mistakes.
Yeah, but you have to give the kid the morale which will allow him to do it.
One tries.
You know.
Because I really see so many games being run by uncreative, stupid people.
Look,
You know?
Nikki,
And it's very disgusting. I'm sure that you all saw it.
No, yes.
But Jesus
But Nikki,
Christ.
most people really accept without very much question the assumptions that they're given.
But they must, I mean, it's illogical.
When I was growing up, you know, the great trick was getting the civil service and work for the post office. You know, now I can't blame those people.
I don't blame them.
You know, it made them very unattractive people from my point of view. You know, but what else was a black cat to do?
Create
No.
something.
You can't create anything unless you have been given, however you get it, I don't know, been given the belief or the rage or the madness or whatever, the necessity out of yourself to do it. Look, read a book by Richard Wright. The late Richard Wright wrote a book called Lord Today, which I meant to get for you today. It's about the post office. It's not about the post office. It takes place in the post office.
Right.
No.
Granted.
It's a tremendous, tremendous book. It's one day in the life of one black man. And no black cat can read that and not know, you know, because it's true. It's true. It's a fantastic record, you know. You see, the nature of the drama, in a sense, is that you and I both had to raise a child, but if I've been destroyed before I get home, you go one way, I go another, and the kid gets lost. And it isn't the fault of the woman or the man, and certainly not the fault of the kid.
It's not a question of blame, though. It's a question of responsibility.
Yeah, but
and it is our responsibility to make sure that kid does not go.
But what I'm trying to get at, Nikki, is that in order to take the responsibility, you have to be able to take the responsibility. It's not a mystical act. Somebody's got to pay the rent, and I can't put you on the streets.
That's what you say. We have tried to make you able to pay your rent, or my rent, or our rent. We have found that there are not enough jobs, there is not enough money for you to do that. Now, why can't we try it my way? I think that the only thing that's changed in the last, since Martin Luther King, since 54, I think the only thing that's really changed is the black woman. And what she has
said... No, I don't think she's changed. I think she's become more visible.
I think she's changed. Because there was a time, let's say my mother, you know what I mean, my aunts and things like that, they would say, okay, if that's the way you establish your manhood, I'm going to go for it. And my generation says, hey, no good.
Okay.
You must establish a new base.
I'll agree with that.
And we are, as a group, demanding that a new base be established.
Yeah, but be careful as a woman of what you demand of a man.
I demand that he be a man.
But you can't
because
say,
the provision part...
Yeah, but you can't say you demand it. You have to suggest it.
Well, that's your ego that says that. No, I demand it. Now you deal with that.
All right. Okay.
I'll
even go with that.
I demand that you be a man, and I don't think that that's asking too much. Because if I wanted a provision, you know, instead I would get a camper. You know what I mean? I would get a camper that provides things. You know what I mean? You get an army surplus kit that provides things. I need a man. And black men have always been offered to provisions. People are either going to eat or starve to death. You know, the men of Biafra, the people were starving and they were still the men. Had to be that way. Through that horrendous kind of war, But it had to be that way because sometimes you're not able to feed your family. Sometimes you're not able to clothe your family. Do you then also deprive them of your manhood and of the input that a man has? Who teaches my son how to pee?
Yeah, but
you see?
Yeah, but you're talking. I agree with you. I see that very well. But it's one thing to be in a situation where you see that you have, where you see a future, however bloody, and to be in a situation where you see no future at all.
But you are. It is incumbent.
If I know,
it is incumbent
if
that
I
we
know
see a future.
If I know what I'm demanding of you, in some sense, makes sense. If I know the fact the kid is not eating today or tonight or tomorrow, in some way makes sense. Yeah, then I can be there. But if it doesn't make any sense, and if I don't see anything coming out of it at all,
will he eat if you're not there?
If you're on welfare, he won't eat if I am there. That's the law. But I don't want to get bogged down into that. What I really mean is that, yes, a man can do that if he sees a way, if he sees that it means something. My father couldn't see that. And he was quite right, because there wasn't anything.
There's something, because all I know that works in the world is a relationship.
Yes, all right.
Okay, that's all that's going to work. It takes two people to have a relationship.
Yeah, but the relationship.
If you don't have a dream, fake it.
But the relationship, you can't fake a dream.
You got to fake it, because we don't have dreams these days. How the hell can you have a dream? For what?
Well, it isn't.
So everybody's jiving, but let's jive on that level.
If I love you, I can't lie to you.
Of course you can lie to me, and you will. If you love me and you're going off with Maddie someplace, you're lying to me. Because what the hell do I care about the truth? I care if you're there. What Billie Holiday say, hush now, don't explain.
All right, I accept that.
Of course you'll lie to me, because I don't even want to care. What does the truth matter? And why are you going to be truthful with me when you lie to everybody else? You lied when you smiled at that cracker down the job, right? Lie to me, smile. Treat me the same way you would treat him.
I can't treat you the way I treat him.
You must. Because I've caught the frowns and the anger. He's happy with you. Of course he doesn't know you're unhappy. You grin at him all day long. You come home and I catch hell. Because I love you, I get least of you. I get the very minimum. And I'm saying, fake it with me. Is that too much of the black woman to ask of the black man? For 10 years, so that we can get a child on his feet that says, yeah, father smiled at mother. He talked to me about school today. Who cares that you can read or can't read? Most Americans can't read. Most people can't read. They look at the pictures.
Baby, I know what you're saying. I know exactly what you're saying, and I don't disagree. But no, I'm going to be honest and think about it really. I'm not so sure that that is a human possibility. If I have to smile all day, and the cat on the job, the foreman, you don't understand why I'm smiling.
Mm-hmm.
Not because I want to smile, I'm smiling because that baby needs new shoes. I can't give a performance all day on the job and come home and give a performance all night in the house.
Okay, so one of the performances will stop.
Yes. So you say, and okay, I might be willing to go with it, but who's going to pay the rent?
You're back to that again. The rent will get paid.
Look, baby, I'm willing to play it your way, but you have to see my point of view.
I see your point of view, but the rent will have to get paid.
The price of the rent is my smile.
No. I don't want you prostituting yourself. I demand.
I don't want you prostituting yourself either. One of us has got to work.
You will work it out, because you are intelligent enough and you are sensitive enough. You are a man enough to work out a new system, because we started off with everybody's protest now, and we're back there again. As long as the assumptions are the same, nothing will change.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So we must corner ourselves to make a new assumption.
Okay, I buy it.
In case it was sort of like left up in the air, or somebody, like, I didn't get it across. I really think that my father, Jones Giovanni, is a groovy cat, and he's lived with my mother now for 35 years under holy wedlock, and I think that that's good for them. You know, I think that that sort of thing worked for them. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's the main thing, that they were able to love despite it all.
That's what we were talking about before.
Right,
you know.
Exactly.
And you, by the way, you do not have to tell me that you love your father. I knew that.
Yeah, I think he's a gas.
Yes,
I just don't want to marry him. But I think, let's talk about writing for a moment, because it seems that most black writers at certain points always come back to explaining who they are. They always come back to the personal essay. You've written several novels. One that I happen to love a lot is Tell Me How Long the Train Has Been Gone.
I'm glad you like that.
I'm particularly, I just fell mad in love. I gave copies to my friends. I was glad when it finally came out in paperback and I could afford to do what I was doing. But it seems that even though we deal in the novel, and we deal in fiction, or we deal in poetry, say, we always have to come back to say, you know, who are we?
Well, you know, I don't know, well, like, for example, in Train, one of the things I discovered in writing it, like I haven't done it, you know, when I began it, that, you know, to answer your question, or to deal with the question, because it's an enormous question for me. But there's a moment in the bar up in New York State when Leo was watching Jerry, the Italian, right. And he's watching him with an older Italian who's just come to America. And Leo thinks to himself that Salvatore understood Jerry because he existed, in effect, already in Salvatore's imagination. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he understood Jerry because of the life that he himself had lived. But no one thinks Leo looks at me that way, because I don't exist in anybody's imagination. You know? And how can I put it? The reason we are forced to become more and more open, overt, is because, in fact, when you walk down the street, coming back now to the black man, black woman thing, you're my wife, or my sister, or my mother. I know very well that the people who are looking at you know nothing whatever about you. Nothing at all. You know, if it's Marilyn Monroe or Pat Nixon, you know, they know or think they know. You know. But until this century begins to apprehend the experience out of which Alina Horn comes, you know, for example, or Ethel Waters, or you, or Paul
Aretha
Robeson,
Franklin.
or Aretha Franklin. Because white people, or Ray Charles, they don't know what that comes out of. There's no metaphor in their experience for it. Or the metaphor in their own experience is so deeply buried and so frightening. Because you see, the reason that people think it's important to be white is they think it's important not to be black. They think it's important to be white because white means you are civilized, and being black means you're not civilized. And it's yet to be apprehended in any way whatever that, in fact, I will not be able to walk the streets or even look at you or you at me or do whatever we do in our terrible days, day to day, if we were not civilized. You know, but we represent a civilization. I don't mean merely literally the African civilization or the Indian civilization or whatever. I mean a sense of life, which is the only thing that civilizes anybody, which for mercantile commercial reasons, to put it a little bit too simply, the rise of Europe attempted to destroy. I say attempted to destroy because it did not in fact destroy it. It dispersed it, and under that pressure, it began to become something else. What it comes to is that I'm civilized in a way that Englishmen are not. You know, because I've had to depend on a principle which Europeans have learned to distrust.
Let's say.
Does that make sense to you, though?
Sort of on one level, and because I tend to be slow sometimes, not sort of on another. But what I'm trying to ask maybe is, that's a dirty trick niggas for a living. What I'm trying to ask, though, like, do you think that you would ever write, say, a work of fiction, or maybe even a work of nonfiction that did not include white people? That was just about some groovy black people that you knew. You know, in terms of characters, in terms of who you're speaking to and why. You think that's, I mean, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm, I do. Well, how can I answer it? I'm working on something now which are no white people. But I'm also working on a novel which, for the most part, takes place in Europe. And it's, to put it again, to simply concern the situation of an Arab in France.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in that context, I don't know, the Arab is certainly a nigger in France, or he would be a Puerto Rican in New York,
Mm-hmm.
or a Mexican in California. And what I'm trying to, it's very dangerous to talk about something you haven't finished, but...
Yes, I will understand that. Yeah.
What I'm trying to get at is my apprehension, anyway, of the crisis of this age. And the crisis has something to do with identity, and that has something to do with buried histories.
Mm-hmm.
Not merely our history has been buried, but as we said before, when I was talking about, the thing, my homework on Brixton, doing homework on the English working class,
Mm-hmm.
that history has been buried too.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking about liberation, we were talking about writing. What a writer is always doing, whether or not he knows it, is he has to go to the source, because there isn't anything else to work from. You can't work from other people's assumptions. You have to work out of what you discover are your own.
Mm-hmm. And
your own assumptions come out of something much deeper than you. It takes a long time before you realize that there is a connection, in fact, between Tell Me Along the Train's Been Gone and Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. Or what Ray Charles does with dreary little anthems no one ever would dream of hearing, until he got his hands on them and put our experience into them.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden.
Ragtime band.
Yes, for example. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Really fantastic.
Well, that's what I mean by energy. That it seems to me that's the assignment of an artist, because the people who produced him, I am not responsible to anybody but the people who produced me. Whether or not they knew they produced me, whether or not they wanted to produce me. Mm-hmm. I cannot drive a truck, and I can't sing a song. But the people who produced me pretended me to do something which they knew before I knew that I might be able to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but there's and I keep coming back to this kind of a thing, but there's a whole movement or something that says that we have to write only about black people, and you have to, you know what I mean, that there's a little thing that says we're going to dictate.
Look, the very first thing that a writer has to face is that he cannot be told what to write. Nobody asked me to be a writer in a way, they didn't know in any case. In any case, I chose it. Since I'm a man, I have to assume I chose it. Perhaps, in fact. I could go, perhaps, in fact, I didn't choose it. But,
you were chosen.
But in any case, the one thing you have to do is try to tell the truth. And what everyone overlooks is that in order to do it, when the book comes out, it may hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
But in order to do it, it had to hurt me first. I can only tell you about yourself as much as I can face about myself. It's happened to everybody who's tried to live. You go through your life for a long time, you think that no one has ever suffered the way I've suffered. My God. And then you realize, you read something, you hear something, and you realize that your suffering does not isolate you. That your suffering is your bridge.
Mm-hmm.
That many people have suffered before you. Many people are suffering around you, and always will. And all you can do is bring, hopefully, a little light into that suffering. Enough light so the person who is suffering can begin to comprehend his suffering and begin to live with it and begin to change it. to change the situation. We don't change anything. All we can do is invest people with the morale to change it for themselves.
I agree with that. I'm pursuing this because it's something that keeps coming up that personally I'm interested in what you have to say. But the same argument, I agree with you as a matter of fact, but the same argument you hear say, they say, well, why should a writer be free to write what he wants? When, say, a teacher is not free to teach what he wants, or a postman.
A teacher who is not free to teach is not a teacher, you know.
Yeah. That's true.
You know, if I assume that responsibility, then I've got to be free to teach the way I see it. Angela Davis is precisely in trouble, not for all those nonsensical reasons given by those impeccable, honorable men like the governor of California and the head of the FBI. Not for any of those reasons, but because she was trying to teach. And to teach in the situation in which black people in America find themselves, really to teach, is a revolutionary act.
Yeah. You solved it for me, because it's something I keep hearing. And they always say, well, why should the artist be free to do what he wants to do when nobody else is?
The artist is not free to do what he wants to do. The artist is free to do what he has to do.
When, in fact, everyone else should pursue along those lines. Yeah. Yeah, that's wild. I hadn't thought about it that way. It's God's truth. I've been having revelations a lot lately. It's a personal thing. So what do you think, about the development, say, of the whole black literature trend from, say, Richard Wright till let's say, me?
All right, it's a good...
This is a good cutoff period.
No, it's a good beginning period. It's a good beginning period.
Thank you.
All right, arbitrarily, Richard Wright to you.
Or Chester Himes, since Chester goes beyond Richard. And since I happen to adore Chester.
Oh, Chester, yes.
Chester's exciting to me because when you go from, say...
well, Chester's got guts.
Oh, my God. Lonely Crusade, you talk about it. Lonely Crusade.
Which I didn't like when I was 22.
I loved it. When I read it,
all.
I found the first edition. I won't even tell you what I paid for it. And simply adored it. And I could see why everybody hated it.
Let me make a confession. When the book came out, I was working for the New Leader.
Oh,
you know,
well, I see why you, yeah.
Wait a minute, hold on. And I said working for the New Leader, I was doing book reviews for $10 a shot. And going through my own changes, And also, this is very important, really. I was in a kind of political crisis because I had been a kind of communist, when I was 19.
Whatever it
anyway,
is at 19.
Whatever it means, 19. And I learned a great deal about the American Communist Party. It's a very...
I like to read as an outsider.
Indescribable organization.
It's crazy. Well, I dislike it.
But since the book, in a sense, for me, had the aura of the things I was battling, the political elements I was battling, the book frightened me. Because in those years, I don't want to get sidetracked from the Communist Party, but in those years, the Communist Party was, in a sense, the only haven for a young American black writer. It was also a terrible trap, in which most people lost their lives because the American communists were also, after all, Americans, And you worked for them like you worked for everybody else. Except since they were communists, you're not supposed to say you worked for them. And all of that complicated my reaction to both Chester and to Richard. In a sense which I can't exactly... It took me a long time to understand, But it's a question of generations again, It's a question...
They're both a generation older than you.
Yes, yeah. It's a question of generations. I had to get to be a man myself in quite another context. And since in effect, after the Second World War, the American Communist Party was a very different organization in a sense, and and the black situation became different too. There was no haven at all for black writers, so I split. I had to split, otherwise I would be dead. And figure it out on the stones of Paris. Do you know what I mean? Okay. Now, Richard left a tremendous testimony. you know, about a time that will never be seen again, in which your son will read about the way he reads about Greece, you know.
Yeah.
You know, it came out of a set of assumptions, you know, which a boy 21, that's what I was then, had to fight if he was going to live at all, you know. Because what you couldn't accept was that pain. You couldn't accept that past as being your present and still more your future. You know, you had to find some way of dealing with it. And to deal with it meant you had to find another vocabulary. You had to risk your life. You know, you had to risk it all. You had to go for broke. You know,
which both Chester and Richard.
Now I can see what I owe to Richard, what I owe to Chester, what I owe to Langston, what I owe to W.B. Du Bois, what I owe to Frederick Douglass. But I could not see that when I was 20. You know, I don't think anybody can see that at 20, you know. But you see, they were on one level simply more exalted victims. I still remember a boy named Angelo Herndon who wrote a book called Let Me Live.
Right.
You know, I have no idea what happened to him. You know,
He's probably dead.
He's probably
like everybody
dead,
else.
you know, like everybody else. And that's your future.
Yeah.
You know, and it takes a long time before you accept what has been given to you from your past. You know, what we call black literature is really summed up for me by the whole career, let's say, of Bessie Smith, Ray Charles, Aretha Franklin, because how it's been handed down since we couldn't read or write as far as they knew, you know. And it was at one time, after all, not 1,000 years ago, a crime to be able to read if you were black. You know, it was punishable by law. You know, if we had to smuggle information somehow, and we did it through our music, and we did it in the church. You know, you were talking before about, you know, the church you went to visit. You know, I thought about the Apollo Theater. The last time I saw Aretha, and what did she do with the Apollo Theater? But turn it into a gospel church service, you know.
And everybody
really,
testified.
You know, and that's true religion.
Yeah.
You know, and anything a black writer is trying to do has to come out of that. I don't mean it has to be limited to that, but it comes out of that because the standards which come from Greece and Rome, for example, you know, even the standards which come from what we call the Christian the Jewish Christian ethic, are very dubious when you try to apply them to your own life.
Yeah, dubious
You
at
know.
best, yeah.
I use the word advisedly, yes. You know, so you have to use what in fact you have as distinguished from what you've been told you have.
There's a question someplace, I'm trying to form it. And again, I guess I'm stuck with Chester because among other things, he's one of my favorite writers, and I've read everything to date, including his autobiography that he's written. So it's easier for me. But if you move from, say, If He Hollers, Let Him Go, right into third generation Castor, the first on that group of, okay. Then he had to stop. He left the States also. He left the States much later than all of you all, in terms of age.
Not much, well, later in terms of age.
He was much older.
Yeah.
Then he began Pink Toes and went into the Coffin at Gravedigger Jones, which everybody assumed was safe. You dig it? Then he did, well, most people, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know.
That they could publish him because they said, oh, it's just a detective story. Then he did, of course, the master detective story, Blind Man with the Pistol. And they said, who's the murderer? He said, the state's a murderer.
It's not a detective story at all. It's an allegory.
It's fantastic. Exactly. But again, I'm talking about Chester and Chester's pursuit of truth. Because Richard Wright died before he quit pursuing truth, or was murdered before he quit. You know what I mean? But Chester could say, okay, I will pursue truth in this way, which looks a little better, that you can make a movie out of it if you want to. It'll still be true, and then takes it right to Blind Man with a Pistol.
Sweetheart, it's the same thing that we were doing on the plantation when they thought it was singing Steal Away to Jesus, and I was telling you it's time to split.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It's like, you know,
But
steal
why
away,
do we
steal
always
away.
get hung up in, if I can use that kind of a word, why do we as black writers seem to be so hung up in the truth? If I can, I'm asking this as a younger person.
Because the
you know what I mean?
responsibility of a writer is to excavate, the only way I can find, again, the experience of the people who produce them, because the act of writing is the intention of it. The root of it is liberation. Look, this is why no tyrant in history was able to read, but every single one of them burned the books.
It's true.
You know?
Yeah.
That is why no one yet believes, really, that there is such a thing as a black writer. A black writer is still a freak. You know,
Maybe even
a dancing dog. We don't yet exist in the imagination of this century. And we cannot afford to play games. There's too much at stake.
But there has to be a way to do what we do and survive, which is, to me, what seems to be missing.
Sweetheart, our ancestors taught us how to do that. We have survived until now. Hughes Chesterton is a very good example. You know, and people may think Blind Man with a Pistol is a detective story. He didn't write it for the people who think it's a detective story.
Yeah, that's a great book, though. You know, and it's very
but you see what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
Look, there was a law. Let me say a very brutal thing. A very brutal thing, but it has to be said, I think. There was a law in America not 1,000 years ago which stated that a black man has no rights. This was a law,
yeah,
which a white man is bound to respect. Now, we have come to this. I can say now that the people who framed that law have no standards which I am bound to respect. That's the way the wheel goes round. No white critic can judge my work. I'd be a fool if I depended on that judgment. You know what I'm trying to say?
Exactly. But I'm not sure that anyone at this stage, I personally hate critics. Maybe they're right. I'm not sure that anyone...
Actually, I love critics, but they're very rare. A real critic is very rare.
A real critic, to criticize a real book, would have to write a book of equal length, which case is a waste of time, because you could read the book that they're criticizing.
That's right.
Whether it be good or bad, whether it's to explain, you know what I mean? Mostly, though, the young critics are, I think, just trying to hurt people. And the young black critics try to hurt people, I think, essentially. And the white critics don't understand. In many cases, they would like to praise it, but they don't understand.
I will be able to accept critical judgments the day I understand that they understand Ray Charles.
It never happened.
No. When that day comes, then, okay, that's a new ball game. We'll play it, we'll see.
Yeah. I would rather a 14-year-old kid said, I didn't like that essay or didn't like that poem. I could relate to that because I know that he read it and that he understood it.
I felt myself together by the judgments of a few people whom I trusted.
Yeah, it's the way it has to be.
Who I knew would not give me any...
Beep. Yeah. It's a funny situation to be in these days because everybody's trying to delineate what you're doing. And to me what's important is that things are being done.
Look, baby, I know that my mother worked for them for a long time. A long time. A long time. And I know she came to the house every morning, left every night. And they did not know anything about her at all.
I can dig it.
When I discover who my mother is, they may be able to tell me who I am. Until they do that, they can't, until they do the one thing. Until they know who their maid is, they can't tell me anything about me.
Yeah.
And still less about you.
You know, we were talking earlier about the junkie situation.
Mm-hmm.
Which I'm kind of, you said that it related to like that whole sexual thing. I'm kind of curious.
Well,
we don't have to discuss it.
No. I was thinking about something a junkie once said to me, who was a very good friend of mine, a musician. And he said, "You're a junkie too." I thought to myself, am I? You know, because something in the way he said it made me, because I came to the same streets.
Mm-hmm.
I knew why he was a junkie, and I knew what had happened to me. Is it you're a junkie because you talk to yourself? I had to think about that. And I thought about it, and what he meant was you have to listen to your own sound.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to find a way to listen to your own sound. You live in a kind of echo chamber. And that's true, you know. And it also demands a terrible turning away from many things, you know. On one level, I must say that some of the junkies I have known have been among the most valuable people I've ever met in my life. Because they know something. I'm not being trying to be mystical about it, but they know their situation. George Kane wrote a book called Blues Child Baby,
Right.
which is a tremendous, tremendous book. And the first honest book I've ever read about the condition of a junkie. But it really is exaggerated, or rather, you know, made clear, the situation of being a black man in America. You could even go further than that and say the situation of being a white man, being a man in this civilization. Because in fact,
frustrated the hell out of me.
it's a tremendous book.
Maybe that's why.
Yeah, read it again.
I will.
Read it again. It's a very frightening book. But you have to, in order to live, finally, make so many difficult and dangerous choices that the one thing you really are trying to save is what you lose. And what you're trying to save is one thing: your ability to touch another human being or be touched by that person. Mm-hmm. You know, that's what you're really trying to save. And when you realize you can't save that either, you hit the needle. You know? And it is one more way. After all, the junk comes from somewhere. I don't care how many cowboys they throw to the wolves and how many, drives against drugs. I lived in the ghetto, and I watched it. You know,
I think that's the biggest hype in the world.
You buy drugs in the ghetto like you buy whiskey in the deep south from the sheriff.
Right.
You know, it's part of a criminal conspiracy to destroy black people. The proof of this is nobody cared as long as our kids were dying. Mm-hmm. It's only when it got, the plague spread outward up to Scarsdale, Westchester, and white kids started dying. Then we have a drug problem.
They have a drug problem.
No.
I think it's a big hype. And I'm not on anything, so I don't know it from the inside. I don't try to. But all it's done is to divide the people who are not on drugs. Because the junkie and the pusher go on.
Yeah, the junkie and pusher do
They
go
have
on.
a love affair.
But
Nobody's going to break them up. But you and I fight about it.
I think really, seriously, something my brother said to me years ago, he got robbed by a junkie, right? Okay. And he was very hot, he was very angry. But then he realized that the junkie didn't have any choice but to rob him. That the whole point was to set you at a division, Mm-hmm. I decided after that, that the junkie is a victim like me, a brother like me. Mm-hmm. I ain't no better than he is. I really am not any better than he is. We're in the same trap. We're in the same trap for the same reasons. Mm-hmm. It's the same way, that the great powers can use a tribal war in some unknown country, set them against each other, then blame both parties and put the money in Switzerland, and they still own the country.
Yep. But both countries are to blame because they have to stop and think about it.
Of course. I mean,
Nigeria just finished with that horrendous fiasco, which is what you're talking about.
One of the examples that I mean.
Yeah. There was no point in it.
But, baby, it takes people a very long time to learn a very little. If you consider your own life, if I consider my life, You know, when I think how little I've learned in, after all, a fairly long time, and what it has cost me to learn whatever I've learned, and then to face whatever it is I've learned, and then to act on it, it takes a long time. You know?
I don't think that...
Do you see what I mean, though?
Sure, but I don't think that I'm all that, like, different or exception or something like that. But I think there's certain things... Well, first of all, I don't need anybody to feel better than, you see? And I think that, like, that junkie hype, that whole war hype, that whole homosexual hype, you know what I mean? That whole...
Do I not?
He's not black hype. I don't need it, because it doesn't make me any better.
People invent categories in order to feel safe. White people invented black people to give white people an identity. No.
But it's
Cats who think of
insane
themselves as straight invent faggots so they can sleep with them.
That's true.
Without becoming a faggot themselves.
Somehow.
You know.
It's a hype, though.
If you're a writer, you're forced to look behind the word and to the meaning of the word. You know.
And to the actions produced by the word.
Yes. Yes. You're responsible for what that word means.
I agree.
You know. You have to find a way to use that word, to liberate the energy in that word, so it has a positive effect on the lives of people. There is such a thing as a living word.
The word was made flesh.
That word, that's right. That's not a mystical statement.
No, it's true. It's true. I've seen that. I'm just always amazed at the number of hypes, though, that people go for. You know, like, if you don't eat meat now, you're somehow better than somebody who has a pork chop.
Look, baby.
And what does it matter?
Baby, I told you. Baby, I told you. I told you before. You know, some things seem new to you.
It doesn't seem new to you. No. It's one of the problems being here. I just can't get over how people continue the BS when we see that it has nothing to do with it.
Because they're afraid to let it go.
But they're perpetuating their own destruction.
You tell to some white South African farmer.
I can't tell that to some black guy. You know what I mean?
That you're buying the destruction of your children.
He doesn't have to hear it. I mean,
yes, I
see,
know.
we talk at counter purposes sometimes. The white South African does not have to hear me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If his children are short tough. If I walk down the street and tell some cat, listen, so what if you don't eat meat and you eat imported sugar? You're a nigger. You understand? He gets mad at me.
Yeah, but you have to understand why he gets mad at you.
Because
first of all, he ain't mad at you. He's mad because what you told him is the truth.
It's true.
You're mad. He's mad because you peeped his whole card. He's mad because he is trying to establish an illusion which you're breaking. He's mad the same way those terrible preachers in the church I grew up in were mad, you know, when I began to ask them questions about what does this really mean? You know, when I began to watch their lives. They were nothing but pimps and hustlers, really.
Yeah.
You know, wrapped in a cloak, you know, in the blood of Jesus and all that jazz, you know. And you ask them a real question, they hate you. Of course they hate you.
But it just...
It's so
self-destructive.
But it's got nothing to do with you. Of course it's self-destructive. Yes, I know that. But
we're back at how we're going to get over that and into...
Look, baby, I've written off my generation, you know, completely. I don't talk to them. Let's go back to the kid. You talk to those people who can hear you, and you save what you can save. And you're not going to live forever either, you know.
Thank God.
Yeah, what you have to do is make it possible for others to live.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's the only reason to be here. You know, who needs the rest of it, really?
That's true.
You know.
It's so weird, though. It's so... it's counterproductive, I guess.
That's very bad English.
That's very bad. Would you say that, like, to sort of sum things up here, would you say, like, you tend to be optimistic? You know, on those kind of levels?
When I pick your kid up in my arms, yes. I look at you, yes. You know.
Not me.
Yes.
I'm very pessimistic.
Oh, no, you're not as pessimistic as you think you are.
I'm not pessimistic or
You got far too much energy. to be as pessimistic as you think you are.
I'm pretty pessimistic, though.
No, I think you're pretty realistic. I think you're pretty cool. I think you're pretty clear. But pessimists are silent. Pessimists are people who have no hope for themselves or for others. Pessimists are also people who think that the human race is beneath their notice. They're better than other human beings.
Back to that.
Hmm?
So we're back. People really feel the need to feel better than somebody, don't they?
Because they can't. That's a mystery which I can't. But they do feel it. I don't know why they feel it. But they do. It's like being in competition with somebody, which is something I never understood. I've been, in my own life, in competition with me.
Which is enough.
Enough.
So, well, yeah. Just fulfilling
That'll keep you
yourself.
busy.
Just,
It's very good for the figure.
It makes you happy,
Well, it means that in any case, you can walk into a room and talk to somebody, look them in the eye, And if I say, I love you, I can say it. But I can't, get on my face, I can mean it.
Right.
I've only got one life, and I'm going to live my life, in the sight of God and all his children.
That's all I can see, it's maybe parochial, narrow-minded, bullheaded. But it just takes up so much energy just to keep yourself happy. You know what I mean?
It isn't even a question of keeping yourself happy. It's a question of keeping yourself in relation to, in some kind of clear relationship, more or less, to the force which feeds you. Some days you're happy, some days you ain't. But as long as we can manage to deal with it on the simplest, level,
right.
Just to bear in mind that this person facing you is a person like you.
Yeah.
They're gonna go home and do whatever they do, just like you. They're as alone as you are.
But that becomes a responsibility, doesn't it?
Well, it's called love.
Yeah. We agree. Yeah. Love is a tremendous responsibility, though.
It's the only one to take. There isn't any other.
I agree.
That was incredibly beautiful. We've come to the end of this, what I think is a very important exchange of ideas and experiences, and really love between Nikki Giovanni and Jimmy Baldwin. And we here at Soul thank them so very much for letting us have the opportunity to do this special program, a conversation between Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin. This is Ellis Hayslip saying good night from Soul. See you next week.
That's awful. We're supposed to be arguing.
We blew this gig.
Goofed again. No, I think love is an answer, but you have to be logical about it.
Well, it's another way, of course. But logical, you say logical, rational, I say clear.
So excited. Oh, wait. Back. Here we go. Now we're working. Peace, peace, peace. I am Phillip Roundtree, and you are tuned into the January 12th edition of Rhetorically Speaking. This is part 2 of a dialogue talkback, which you just got finished watching between Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin. I am joined by my illustrious, trying to think of some more ways to describe y'all. Just dope black folk. I think that pretty much sums it up. Shout out to Stephanie Tisdale, educator. Shout out to Zane, professional Afro-American dancer. I wasn't going to go Negro this week. But they're joining me again so we can have this dialogue about part two of the conversation between Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin. I watched it earlier today, and man, 40 years later, and it's still so pertinent. Some of the themes that they discuss, which we'll be discussing tonight, is just so relevant, right? It's just so relevant. So we're gonna get right into it. So how y'all feeling today? Make sure y'all unmute yourselves. I know y'all used to Zoom by now. Word. All right, gotta see why they not hearing you. This only half is listen. Everything was going amazing. Everything was going amazing, and then I'm not sure what's going on. Ay, ay, ay. All right, we're gonna pause for a second. Be right back. All right, we're going to try this again. Peace, peace, peace. I am Phillip Roundtree, and you are tuned into the January 12th edition of Rhetorically Speaking. Had some technical difficulties, but that's the game when you're trying to spit knowledge and have thoughtful and insightful conversation. Or it could just be that I have my Bluetooth headphones set up, and so y'all were unable to hear our guests. So as always, for this last it's actually been 2 weeks. I'm joined by Stephanie Tisdale, educator, and Mr. Zane Booker, professional. See, when I go Afro-American, they don't get to hear that, right? So I'm a professional Negro dancer. And we're going to get into this conversation between Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin that had so much depth. And I'm going to get right to it and talking about the themes. And so the first theme that they began discussing was this idea of black liberation. And again, this conversation took place in 1971, 1972 in London. You had a 47-year-old James Baldwin and a 24-year-old. Listen, she was radical, she was militant, she was about her business, right? And that came across in part two of that conversation. And so they began by discussing black liberation, and in particular the idea of shifting the language. And they talked about how shifting the language is the way that they speak is often the way that we think. So I want to pose that to you both to discuss just this idea of black liberation and this connection of between thinking and speaking. Because I don't know if I necessarily agree with that assertion that the way that you speak is typically the way that you think. So what are your thoughts? And we can go. We can start with you, Steph. Again, this is informal. This is our regular conversations that we have sitting outside on the bench at Uncle Bobby's.
Okay. No, yeah, say less. I'm with you. So I was really trying to think back to that specific like framing of it, because I feel like when I heard them speaking, it was about talking, but I think it was more about the ideas with the you know what I mean? Like the less about language and more about like the ideas behind the language. That's what I interpreted from. Does that make sense? So for me, when I was seeing it, I was thinking about that idea. And it's interesting watching Nikki this week, because I feel like she's really laying the groundwork for a lot of the language and conversation, to your point, that we're seeing, I feel like now, with the whole, like, any oppression is oppression. It doesn't matter. Like, let's just take off whatever things change, anything that feels oppressive, it has to go. You know, and I think it was very progressive for a time period. And you see where, like, James is sort of, you know, responding to her like, oh, well, that's just how people are. And that's just, you know, I mean, it's just the world. And he's coming from a generation where it's like, listen, we survived. We were in a war. We had to fight. Like, it was hard. And her thing is like, okay, so now that we have some time, you know, in between, and yes, there's still a lot of stuff going on in the world, but like, can we stop this and that? Because that's just silly. I don't understand why. So I feel like, even to circle back to, you know, which I know we'll get to the end, but it's interesting. I think throughout, she has this theme of, like, questioning things and saying, like, no, either it is or it isn't. Either it's going to be, when we say freedom, either we mean that or we don't. And, like, what are you really saying? And not so much to James directly, but to our community. And I really appreciate that, because I feel like, again, it was her planting seeds for what we see flourish now, which is like our community saying, oh no, we have questions about this, that, and this. And yes, we're all Black, but even in this moment, I have a question about this. I'm not sure about that. If that doesn't serve us, let's get rid of that. There's a lot of sort of like going through the weeds and figuring out what we want to take forward with us. So I don't know, for me, I think that was her real focus on very specific, like, no, if we're saying this, it needs to be so. And I really appreciate that. So, like, beautiful watching her, you know, younger in that moment, like, saying it out loud, you know? Yeah.
Word.
To pick up where Steph left off, I think that she had really specific ideas that she wanted to challenge him on. And I felt like, so the idea that I feel like liberation, when she said liberation, she was talking about love. And she meant love and proximity to the person who is right next to you. Like, that is how you liberate yourself, by actively engaging with that person and not engaging in all of the tropes and all of the isms and all of the outside noise. And she couldn't penetrate. I mean, eventually it took her to 2 hours, I feel like, to really get James Baldwin to come into her way of at least engage her, because I think there was some things going on which disturbed me a little bit. I feel like it took him a while to relinquish his elder status. He was stuck in that elder status. I think that when she was talking about liberation, I'm gonna try to stay to the point, he was very aware that he was on television, and I felt like he had talking points that sort of, when she spoke about something, that he jumped into these talking points, and that bothered me. I was like, that's not the question that she's asking you. She's not asking you to defend Black masculinity and Black oppression. That's not what she's asking you to do. She's asking you to consider an option inside of these relationships that we have. And I thought she was brilliant in that. And that's where I felt like her and I might be jumping back to the first conversation, but that's what pokes out in my head when we talk about liberation, because she was saying, like, we have to change this language. Like, we have to change what being a man is. That was her thing. We have to change that. Being a man is not being a provider. Those two things are not synonymous in my world. And I'm telling you, look at me. I'm telling you that. They can't tell you that because they don't love you. I love you. I can liberate you from that if you would just look at me. But James Baldwin couldn't. I think he was too aware. What I think is that in that forum, he was not going to denigrate the Black man in any way. He refused to do it in that space. I think privately, he may have had a much different conversation. You know, so that's what I was thinking.
Word. I think. Go ahead, Steph.
I was going to say, and to your point, just in agreement with what you're saying, yes, because I feel like, I was just thinking as you were describing, I was like, yeah, I feel like because he had a different weight of and different circumstances and had a different role in the community, he's very public with civil rights. And also, I actually personally respect that. I appreciate that. And that's the difference. That's the old school version. Like in our generation, everything is always, and I don't mean us specifically, but just what's happening with like social media, all conversations are always public. And it's like some of them can be between people. It's like when you're speaking on behalf of the community, keeping in mind that like, okay, you know, there's strategy to it. And I really, one of the things I've always appreciated about James Baldwin is his commitment to Black people, our community, and specifically as a Black man, like his awareness of like, no, I'm with my brothers, even if there are challenges and issues and things I don't agree with. Like you talked about, you know, the church, you know, and his experience there, but it's like either way, I'm all in. You know what I mean? And I don't know, for me, I've always really appreciated that about him.
Were I know when I was, you know, thinking about this idea of liberation after watching, and it definitely was from a loving aspect, right? Loving, having knowledge of self and loving self. But she also went into just this idea of, you know, they had this power versus morale. You know, how are we going to label it? How are we going to, what terminology are we going to use? And she talked about power isn't the land or the money, but power is the ability to affect, right, and effect change. And so when we think about this idea of liberation, she talked about police reform. It's just like, again, even though we know these things, like this was taking place, for us to be right smack dab in the middle of it, I think because of the advent of social media, we're now actually not only seeing it but feeling it, right? Like unless we watched Rodney King get beat on television, right, or we knew somebody who wore the scars of state sanctioned violence, we didn't. It was easier for us to push to the background, but now it's so much in the forefront and in our everyday to hear her talk about it, and then just our own awareness. I know for me, I'm hyper aware of it now, and so to hear her talk about it, it's just like exactly, and then it's just like, damn, right? We're still here, and we continue to be here. We can, you know, he's talking about George Wallace having a Confederate flag in the Capitol, right? And he called it a legal insurrection. And here we have these Trumpers, right, up in the Capitol with the Confederate flag. And again, the more that things change, the more they stay the same. And so, you know, with this idea of just liberation, we talked about it last week a little bit, this idea of leaving, right? Leaving and going elsewhere, like Baldwin did. But like he said, you know, I'm a nigga in America, and I'm American in France. And she talked about just this idea, where else are we going to go? I've paid too much for it, right? We've paid too much for it to leave. And so I do think it's liberating and recognizing and acknowledging that this is home, right? That more change is necessary. And again, it's all rooted in that idea of love. Yeah, y'all silent. I told you I'm not asking y'all questions, y'all.
Oh,
But I'm not asking y'all questions. And again, you could, if you have thoughts about it, you know, go ahead and jump in.
so my riff off the political thing and the power thing is that, again, I'm gonna keep reiterating this, I'm sure throughout the evening, is her point of view is inward. And that's where the savior is. You know what I mean? I love how she spoke about, I don't care about Shirley Chisholm being in politics. I don't care about, you know, whoever becoming mayor. You know what I mean? It doesn't change me. It doesn't change my existence, because for her, it's all about proximity. It's about who is next to me, who's on my block, who's in my face, who's in my world. And I thought, and I don't know what you guys thought about this, but when she was saying, I don't want nobody in my business telling me what to do, I think that's when that triggered James Baldwin, because he thought, I'm assuming, and you guys tell me what you thought, that he thought that was a naive thing, but it's not a naive thing. But he responded to her as if that was a naive, you know, not to have somebody in her business. But it's a radical thing. It's a militaristic thing. It's a revolutionary thing. It's a, you know, it's an anarchistic, if I can use that word, maybe.
Yeah,
I don't know if you guys thought that or not, or felt that.
no, because I have that written down, and she said specifically, I just don't give a damn, right? I'm not interested in anybody governing me, and that had the conversation about no such thing as an individual and concentrating on what's essential. And listen, I understand, and I completely agreed with her. And this, we have this idea. She said, I'm not interested in government. I'm not interested in in any of that, right? I don't want anybody to tell me how. If she was to say that today, now it's, I don't want nobody to tell me how to live my black ass life, right? And that's really truly what it is. And when we talk about that government aspect, not to go too off topic, right? She talked about black folk getting into this machine that is politics, right? And again, sometimes you think you're alone in your thinking, and I get, I love Joanna McClinton, Isaiah Thomas. Like I know these folk are out here trying to do pure things, and the thing that resonates in my mind is, how long are you going to be able to stay pure for, right? With because it's literally impossible, right, to participate in that type of machine, and not be scarred or do scarring, while in that position. It reminds me of something that Ayn Rand said, right? I don't go around quoting Ayn Rand all the time, but it's this idea of government. The purpose of government is this idea that people can't govern themselves, right? So you need a structure to govern folk, but then you take people from this ungovernable place them in government and tell them to govern others. And so it's kind of contradictory. And so yeah, this idea of allowing me to make decisions for myself and those that I love is most definitely something that I'm in agreement with. Go ahead, Steph.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things. So like one thing that comes to mind is the idea of order, right? And I think historically we see communities around the world and the ancient peoples, who happen to be African people. It just so happens that that's what it is. That's the reality of things, right? We were here, and then other communities, which also happen to be communities of color over time, again, ancient, where folks are trying to figure out how to navigate their existence. And so, I mean, when we think about like so-called laws and all these other kinds of things that we experience now, these are like versions of really just the more contemporary Western influence version of a thing. But really, when you think about the idea of like, what do human beings need to live, to coexist? What does that look like? What are the rules of engagement? And there's a lot of like consolidated, well, more so consolidated, but also cumulative like inheritance that we have access to. So all to say, fast forward to like Nikki G saying what she's saying, it's like, okay, that makes sense. And I think I've definitely felt that way. So I understand that feeling. And I think what James Baldwin is speaking to is, and even for myself, is that journey as we all go through different cycles in our lives, right? You go through parts where like, F all this doesn't make sense. Like she was in that zone of like, none of this makes sense. And she's like, he said, I agree with you, you're right. However, when you start to think through the idea that like, for some of us, I'm not saying everybody, that you're still influenced by those things. Meaning that when you go and then you go to the office for the thing, it doesn't matter what it is, it could be taxes, bank, whatever, and then they hit you back with the policy or the law or the thing that has been influenced by the structure, whether you agree with it or not, or like it or not. Now that's a different conversation. Now it's a matter of really negotiating. And to your point also, Phil, about the whole idea of being influenced by the structure, the first thing that came to mind for me is, again, this idea of compromise and thinking about the fact that like we're all influenced by the structures we engage as well. Because for someone who's in politics or appears to be more well-known or on a different stage of things, they have a specific role, but then in each of the roles that we all play, there's always this back and forth of like, okay, to go to work, I get paid, I gotta, the compromises are happening. It's not like they're not happening. So now it's a matter of saying that like all of us in some way are compromising and existing in the space. To what end is the question for me. So when we look at our ancestors, what end might have been, like he said, I smile to pay the rent. but it's still a compromise and everyone's clear about it. Or like he talked about his mom, it's like, listen, they don't know her, but she understood, well, in order to get this, I got to do that. Do I like it? Is it ideal? No. Maybe eventually we can build into something that gives me a little more leeway, gives you a little more leeway, James. And then James becomes this world-renowned international, author. What's the likelihood of that? I mean, it is a likelihood actually, but it's the point that, like, you see what I'm saying? There was sacrifice, there was compromise. So I think that's important. And I feel like that dialogue between the two of them, I don't think that either is more right than the other, because I think James's thing is, I've been on earth a long time, and I'm gonna tell you, all those ideals are wonderful. When you've got to interact with other people and figure out what you're going to eat tonight, different conversation. And unless you got your own farm, your own army, your own boats, planes, and whatever, you're gonna have to do some negotiating or compromising with things that maybe you don't like.
But that was frustrating for me, Steph, because I felt like there has to be a solution. She kept saying, we can't keep repeating the same behavior. Mm-hmm. Like, once we understand it, then what's the next step? And that's where I was with her. I was like, yes, Mr. Baldwin, I get that. It's not that I do not understand oppression. It's not that I do not understand the system. It's not that I do not understand that, again, that the politics are only going to be but so effective inside of the mentality that's forced down on you. But once you recognize it, then what's the human step to that? Mm-hmm. What's the next level shit right there? You know what I mean? And she was pushing for that. And I wanted him to engage her in that conversation. That's why I was frustrated. I was like, engage her in that. Mm-hmm. Don't just keep telling me that oppression exists. I know that. And I know that. Why you keep telling me?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I was frustrated with him.
And maybe I wonder about his capacity. What Mark will say, I know he has the capacity to imagine and envision. And so I think that, because I feel what you're saying, it's almost like in that moment, being able to just imagine. She wanted him to like imagine the world, right, step out of, and he's like, based on my existence at the time I've lived on earth and what I know to be true, let me tell you, here's my peak. But I wonder if that's not his job to do. That's why you have you. That's why you pass the baton. And now being willing to, and what I do appreciate is that he was actually willing to. It's like when you're out playing and you're like, oh, and the elders like, or grandparents, whoever, parents like, no, y'all go play, I'm good. It's like that kind of thing. Like, you go and go be great, and you're awesome. That's not for me to envision. That is for you to envision. And she did do it, and we see the fruits of that labor. So I feel like I don't know, for me, it felt natural in the way that it happened. Although I'm with you that it would have been interesting for him to engage her and imagine with her in that moment. But I feel like based on his life and experience, it's like, I ain't got time to be imagining it. I'm gonna drink this, whatever he's drinking, whiskey and cigarettes. And
I was trying to figure out, so I had a couple, I'm sorry, Phil, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that, I did notice a shift from last week where I said, listen, it just felt like he was dominating the conversation and she couldn't necessarily get a word in edgewise. And this week it started out a little bit like that, but I think once they got into the relationship aspect between the black man and black woman, and I felt like he was, I don't want to say he was guarded. I mean, naturally.
He was guarded.
Yeah, he was. Naturally, he was doing having a lot of the conversation from an intellectual capacity. Instead of, again, that idea of feeling what it is that she was saying. Until she'd hit him with the conversation that we're about to have with regard to the black woman and black man. And I think he couldn't out-talk himself at that point. Because I watched his facial expressions and his body language, and his words started to say, like baby, right? Like, he's like, damn. She gets it.
Because intellectually, Intellectually, she had him up against the ropes.
But I think it clicked for him.
Because what's at the base of intellect? What's your base when you talk about something that's intellectual? You're talking about a logical through line. So the logical through line, if you were going to evaluate that conversation from an intellectual point of view, was that you are saying that oppression is the reason that we can't change. That was basically Mr. Baldwin's point. And she was saying, no, I have the logical answer, and it's rational. And we have to figure out how to execute this inside of this system. So he did not really have a comeback for that. He didn't have a logical comeback for that. And he said it. He said, I'm not being rational. I'm not being logical. So intellectually, she had him up against the rope. He didn't have an intellectual, logical response for me. I mean,
no. I'm talking about just how he was approaching the conversation.
Right.
How he was approaching the conversation. I think when they did have that specific part of the conversation, and I watched his body language and his facial expressions, and he was like, oh, shit. And I think it goes to what Marla just commented. She said, perhaps we're looking at their discourse as a conversation, and it was more of a track and field, and they represented ideas of different legs of the race. The race. She was taking a baton. And I think in that moment, that's when he gave the baton and he said, here, not to say that he didn't respect her or he didn't love her work and what she did, but I think in that moment, he felt comfortable in saying, all right, go ahead. It's you. Baby. You got it.
Because she's of a different generation.
Yeah.
Partly that she's also a woman, and she even said that she was like, she was offering the feminine, version of the conversation and saying, no, let me. Like she literally said, oh no, the rent will get paid. The kids will eat. And he's like, well, how? And it was like you could see. I know what you're saying. Where like, and to your point, Zane, about that being backed up against the wall, because now we are stepping out of strictly logic. We are stepping out of the Western paradigm, which says, you better come here and work and then you eat. And then it's like, no. There are other ways to do things. There's always other ways to do things. There's spiritual elements to things. There's all these layers that I think any and all genders can, of course, tap into all aspects of all things. I don't believe that that's just a feminine thing, but I think partly, and maybe because of like even the way, we're socialized, whatever the case may be, where there allows room for her to just say like, listen, in this dynamic, here with my mate, it's like, listen, brother, all that fight that you have to do in that space, here we are collaborative. We're working together. And believe me, I will make sure together we will win. Together we will win. And actually that's something that is inherited. That's an inherited mindset from our ancestors. That's what they had to do during enslavement. It was like, oh, I'm mad and you mad. We can't get free like that. We've got to compromise with each other. And I think that was the point she was also getting at, that like, if you're going to compromise out there, you damn sure better be compromising with me. Like you have to. But I think what he was trying to share is, where is the outlet? Again, with the concept of healing and all the things, we got therapy now, we have all that. Back then it was like, he's like, no, we've been up against the ropes. As a Black man, I've been up against the ropes. Everywhere I go is a fight. Everyone's trying to kill me every day, which hasn't changed much, but unfortunately. So his thing is like, just for a moment, I want you to hear me and sit with these emotions. And I respect the fact that he was willing to do that, because I don't think there are many folks in many forums where that conversation could be said so plainly. And that's what, again, why I love me some Baldwin, because he just so plainly stated, like, this is the heart of the Black man, because that Black man is being lynched and murdered and imprisoned and oppressed consistently. Not that sisters aren't, because we are, but again, socially, we're allowed to at least cry a little bit occasionally or have a sister talk and have communication. There's room for that socially in the socialization process. And his thing is like, I'm going to speak for those who who may never tell you that when he walked out, he cried them tears. When I need you to know that part. And I think that was so important and powerful for all generations, but especially in the times. Absolutely.
I think with that, right, we can transition into the next conversation with regards to that idea about the Black man, Black woman relationship and that entire dynamic. And it stemmed from discussing this idea of the civil service. And I think we're talking about this idea of imagination, right? And it's that good old city job. I know I've heard about it, right? You want to get that job, you're there for 30 years, you get the pension. For them, I think they talked about the post office, right? And you get that job and you good. And she was like, well, create something, right? And again, this generational difference, this imagination, taking the creativity that he had and that enabled him to be able to go out to France and to be able to write his ass off, and her saying, okay, you know what? Yeah, you did that for sure, right? But we still can create something. And he's like, well, how do you create something if that's not within you, right? If you don't have that rage, that fire to create, right? And you tend to go along with the status quo, the norm, the toxic masculinity, which negatively impacts you. It looks like you're about to say something.
Well, I'm going back and forth in my head with that argument because I understand. I mean, I think again, he's framing it, and I'm gonna use this word for the masses, right? Meaning the majority of people. But I also think that that way of speaking is what we're talking about when we talked about liberation. Like, we cannot say at the same time that we had a Tulsa and we had all of these different places that were doing the things that maybe they were capitalistic in target, but they were community in the way they affected our lives, right? It made so we can't say in the two things that we're stuck, but we free ourselves at the same time. So the ability is there. And if you're gonna change your language, and he wasn't changing his language. Not that that's the only thing. Yes, we could document all of the things that are. And this is still my argument today. So it's relative to today because I get frustrated when I hear people talk about only the things that are not happening. We speak those things into existence all the time. We talk about the things that are not happening, but there's a lot of things that are happening. There are things that are happening on my end. I have people dumping across the street. I had a 20-minute conversation with my neighbor who's been there for 30 years. I had another 20-minute conversation with my cousin. I had another 20-minute conversation with the brother who takes care of the neighborhood. I saw today that somebody came out and cleaned. So you can't tell me that things aren't happening on the most basic level.
See, but do you think that comes from a place of privilege though? Because you've had this wherewithal.
Ain't nobody privileged around here.
No, I'm
not in that way.
I'm talking about you, because I think you spoke to you speaking to these individuals, right?
They spoke to me too. I didn't. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. Never apologize. I think it's a lot of times, like when we have these conversations, we speak from this place of privilege and we don't necessarily. It's hard as hell, like to live on a day-to-day basis. So I don't necessarily begrudge anybody who has this. I hate this. I think she said it. Like, yo, I might seem pessimistic, and he's like, no, you're not pessimistic. It's just the reality, right? It's the reality. I think you're very optimistic, and so I think when we say look around, like we don't look at the conversations that are taking place amongst folk. I think that that's not portrayed in these various spaces that we frequent, right?
I want to be clear. I live in the hood. Like in a minute, you're gonna hear some gunshots, brother. I'm just saying.
Yeah, no, but again, it's that mentality, and I don't think people who like you're in a space of privilege to even be able to look at these minor conversations that you might have with the neighbor and view that.
But is that minor though?
It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. But again,
it's not minor.
It's not. But it's the mindset, and how did we adopt that mindset? Part of it is a survival mindset, right? Because I'm not. First, I know for me, I'm not used to having interactions with adult men. That's never been anything. I haven't had that experience. So when I had a Mr. Carlton, I tell the story. He bought me a book, Franz Fanon, Wretched of the Earth. And I damn near cried because I didn't know what to say. Like, say thank you. Well, yeah, thank you means something, but I'm not used to engaging with 73-year-old men. Right. And so, again, we got to think about how some of us are conditioned and socialized. We're not conditioned to see the extraordinary in the ordinary.
We're also conditioned to speak to. We're also conditioned to do the opposite of what Mr. Baldwin was doing. We're conditioned to talk like that. We're conditioned to talk about the deficits. We're conditioned to talk about the deficits. But if anything, what I'm willing to say in terms of the spirit of a community and our community and the one that I think they may be equal. You know what I mean? But there are just as many conversations happening about, spirit and health and everything in the community. And you can't sleep on people because you think that they live in poverty. You know what I mean?
And that's the psychological trauma that we're continue to deal with, right? Because how many times have you had that aha moment where you might have engaged with somebody who you might not necessarily would have interacted with? And you're like, oh damn, they're not anything I thought they might have been, right? Because psychologically we're conditioned, again, not to view all interactions with other black folk as being adversarial, right? And or the what can you do for me? Or is that illusion?
It depends on who you are. It depends on the community you grew up in. It depends on the schools you attended. It depends on what type of media is being presented to you. There's so many layers to it. And I think the real difference is, again, in this so-called desegregated, world, all the things with Black folks, right? All the different communities, all the spectrum of the hustler, the, trapper, all whatever, the lady of the night, everybody lived in the same community. So in other words, it wasn't a us, them, educate, I have a degree and I go to college. It was none of that. Everybody had to live together, right?
Y'all gotta come to the crib.
That's a good thing because then you get all of it. And as a young person, this is the whole village concept. You are able to get energy and vibes and mentoring directly and indirectly from everyone, right? So in our more traditional settings, right, enslavement, you have and even during enslavement, people had what they would call a rites of passage or initiation into various traditions and different kinds of things. So that's always been, that's never stopped. But my point is the idea that in a non-oppressive, enslaved, community where, again, pre-colonial, folks were able to do that and just the vibe with it without that external influence, right? But fast forward to America where we're here, so then we're building community consistently, and then post enslavement, right? When we're liberated and our communities are building themselves in the kind of communities that Baldwin is a part of, and even Giovanni. And even us, we've still experienced it again. Even the tricklings of those things where you grew up around folks who people talk about the colloquial, everybody beat you behind, whatever the thing was, even here in Philly. I remember years where, you could get on the bus, go downtown, that was ours, right? We would go to downtown and we would run into people that we knew. Personally, people from family, people from the community. Now it's you go down there, you're I don't know anybody here, right? So the point I'm trying to make is that this idea of how you're groomed, how do you know about the world? How do you know about who you are and what it means to be who you are? And so the influences there's levels to it. You know what I mean? It isn't just one way or the other. And then I think when we also add the intersection of being reared and schooled and spaces that promote, these categories and these caricatures of Blackness, that, if you're Black, then that means you're into hip hop. Okay, maybe I am. And I don't mean to do it that way, but that's because I love hip hop. But how it's presented to us, where we know, well, no, I know Black people listen to, jazz and rock. And, I know all of it because I'm in my community where I get to see all versions of us, right? But if you're separated from it sometimes, or if it's being marketed to you heavily via media, which we get now in 2021, then now that becomes, okay, well, if I'm a Black woman, that means I gotta, whatever, I gotta behave like they do on TV because that's what I gotta do. And it's well, no, I'm in a community with all kinds of people who give me all kinds of versions of what I can be. And now I get to choose. I get to choose in a healthy way. You know what I mean? So I think that's the part that sometimes gets lost for us because we missed it. Oh yeah, these people were with each other and had a chance to flourish and sometimes fail in a community with each other.
Word. So speaking of the relationship between Black men and Black women, where I think Baldwin had this, he already felt comfortable, but he felt comfortable that the future is in great hands with Nikki as she pressed him with regards to this relationship, but again, between Black men and Black women. And she started off with this idea of lie to me, right? Lie to me, like you lied to to everybody else throughout your day. And James says, well, I can't lie to you, right? And so that started this back and forth conversation between the two. And James talked about how, and when we talk about lying to you, she talked about how you go lie in front of the white man, right? When you go lie at the foreman on your job because you smile in his face, right? Other white folk with whom you interact within your comings and goings, you're doing the most, albeit to survive. But I need you to offer me that within the home setting, right? She said, give me 10 years. We need 10 years for this little boy to see that mommy and daddy, that daddy smiled at mommy, that he helped with homework, that he did X, Y, and Z within the household. And James's comeback was, I've been destroyed before I get home. So how can I do that? Right? Like how can I do that? And again, he's speaking on behalf of black men, as you said, and I think I know for me it resonated both perspectives. So I wanted to get your thoughts on it. I'll let you start, Zane.
I mean, it made me think, that conversation made me think about Lorraine Hansberry's A Raisin in the Sun, right? So that character, I can't remember his name, but I think at one point the original was played by Sidney Poitier. I can't remember his name. But he's trying so hard to move forward, and he can't, because one, things don't go right, but two, there's something that's stopping him, and that's the crux of it. That's his sort of thing to overcome. And I think what she's saying is he can't in the play. What's that character's name? Did you put it?
Oh. Walter. Sorry, I was.
What's his name?
Walter. Walter. Younger.
Walter doesn't look to the women as a source of strength. He doesn't look to them for that. You know what I mean? Even though the mother is like transferring all this strength to him and this power from his father and hoping that he makes the right choices. And finally, at one point when he stands up to the white guy who wants to get them out of the neighborhood, he does. I forget why I brought that up, because your question was
just what they both talked about, right? She's telling him to lie to me.
Lie to me,
yeah.
Right? Fake it till you make it. Like, I thought that was brilliant. I went off tangent a little bit, but I thought that was brilliant. Why can't you lie to me? Those are revolutionary acts. You know what I mean? That she was proposing. She was proposing some deep solution. It's like, you lie to him, why you got to come home and smack me? Like, where in the male ego can you not find a space to change that? You know what I mean? Yeah, it's a pathology, right? But how do you change that pathology? What's the anecdote? And that's what she was proposing. And I get it. Is it a stalemate? We can't be at a stalemate, because then the oppressor wins, right? So she was saying, you can't keep letting the oppressor win. Like, we got to figure this out together. And I think that was her crux when she was saying, fake it. Why can't you fake it with me?
Yeah, I hear that. I hear that. I respect it. But I also understand what he was saying. And where he said, because somebody has to pay the rent. That's why I can't just, and not necessarily about faking it with her. I have to fake it on the job. I can't just leave because the rent won't get paid. And again, she's imagining something different.
Wasn't saying leave. She was saying, she was talking about something different.
No, she spoke about leaving. She's saying because the rent will get paid. And again, she's living in this abstract world, which some people do, right? But again, if he's somebody who's a low-skilled worker who all he knows and can do is work in a factory, and he's looking at it tangibly like, all right, the rent has to get paid. It's no 90-day moratorium for, before we get kicked out, we got to go to renter's court and all the legalese. No, that wasn't in effect then. If you don't pay the rent, you got to roll. right? And so this is where he's coming from and saying, listen, I can't just pick up and leave and pick up and quit this job. I can't scowl at work. I can't, because too many people are depending on me, even if it means not loving myself enough, right? And not loving you and the family enough to which is all she's asking for, right? She's asking him to love himself and allow that to manifest itself with others. But he's not necessarily in a position to be able to experience that because of the pressures and the stressors that he's up against. And it's so poignant that what is it, a double entendre? I don't know. And she said, was it, I don't want you to prostitute yourself or something to that effect, right? And he's like, I don't want you to have to do that, right? And it's like, exactly, because again, we talk about this role of manhood and what it meant in 1971, and nothing much has changed here in 2021. The male is, say it again.
Well, I was gonna say that the Steph said this earlier, so I'm just gonna repeat it. The natural flow of that conversation is what we talk about now in gender, non-binary existences. You know what I mean? That whole conversation, because really you breaking down those tropes. You know what I mean? She's saying, look, you could be a different kind of man. You know what I mean? We can figure this out together. We can break the molds on different things. Yeah. Which as a gay man, I feel him, because I feel trapped in those spaces of providing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You don't just let it go. And I somehow I connected with them, and I'm fighting with myself as I'm fighting with him. So that's what you hear.
Yeah.
Like, I see him being stuck. I see me being stuck, because even though our sexuality is different, the mentality is not revolutionary necessarily. The mentality is very stuck, because we are still stuck in one, trying to fight this idea of what a homosexual is. And two, that forces us to cling to this toxic idea of masculinity. So then we're basically poisoning ourselves, because we can't liberate ourselves. And you have this brilliant woman in front of you saying, let me help you liberate yourself. And Baldwin couldn't. He was stuck in that space of one, trying to be this powerful figure. Even though he's flamboyant, he's the most masculine. The ideology is so masculine that it traps him. It traps him from being able to really embrace it. And he does release, but his logical pushback is very masculine. It's very stuck. It's like, this is what a man does. This is why a man is suffering. This is what the white man has done to us. Don't you see that? Don't you see that? She's like, yeah, I see it.
Yeah. I mean,
he's also speaking for, I don't think he's, again, he sees himself as artist, as writer, as voice for his community. So I feel like, to your point, Zane, I think in his personal life, he probably absolutely was able to, and it seems like he was able to acquiesce some of that mentality, right? But in the conversation, he understood that, like, no, but I want to give you the voice of the brothers that I know, like other brothers, right? And I'm not going to say that all the brothers that he knows were that way, but I think he wanted to say he's speaking for his father, he's speaking for his siblings,
and that's what I was going to go to.
That's included in this conversation, and I want to make sure that when you see them, you don't see a monster, because he knows, like, listen, me and you, we good. Like, he knows that she knows who he is, and they're good. He's like, but those brothers, I'm speaking for them, because I know that they won't sit here with you or have the opportunity to sit here with you like this and tell you their heart. I'm going to give you their heart. And yes, it may not be pretty, may not like all parts of it, but I need you to see who they are. And I think that part is so Baldwinian.
Yeah.
So Baldwinian, you know? It's just so beautiful.
I mean, I haven't read all of his books, but what I gleaned from that was, I felt like it was his father talking. Right, that's really what I got from it, because he mentioned last week this idea of his 8 brothers and sisters and why he couldn't do something, why he was the father to them, right? And I think he adopted that. He has that mindset. It's within him, no matter if he's a queer black man or what. Like you said, that idea of masculinity is his father, and I think that impacted. I think it's one of those movies where like the person inhabits you, and that's the person who's talking, and I think that's what was taking place during that time. Um, Marla says the rent has to get paid with the same fierceness that I ought to be loved, cherished, and made to feel safe. And pushing back against the idea is urgent, not to make you small, but so I don't disappear. And I completely agree, because then she hit him with the, as long as the assumptions are the same, nothing will change. Right. But again, we're talking about that fear aspect, that fear associated with change when this is the norm, right? When this is the norm for the time and the experience of so many. We saw it in Sylvie's Love, how he sucked it up and went to the plant, right? Because that disappointment, right? That, and not wanting to disappoint her, and just again that idea of unhealthy masculinity that only now we're really starting to address. But like you said, Baldwin also, he contradicts himself at times, right? Because then he says something that's probably going to be on an IG post tomorrow. He said, "Your suffering doesn't isolate you. Your suffering is your bridge. Suffering is a truism, right?" And so, relating that to just this idea, right, of connectedness, and it's incumbent upon one to recognize that, yeah, your experience isn't only your experience, right? And if you can, again, brothers, if you can convene with one another, right, and have conversation, you might not necessarily have to go home, and you might not even have to lie. You can actually be your true self, right? And be emotional and be expressive, if you don't necessarily subscribe or put yourself into the proverbial box.
But I also think that's again a luxury that we can look at in hindsight.
Yeah.
And that's just the point. You know what I mean? And I think on a level, this is what Baldwin's trying to say. Baldwin's like, listen, all of that's fine and good. And it's lovely. And believe me, I get, what Nikki was saying. I'm kind of in that zone of like, imagine the magical other version. There's got to be another world. Like, I'm with her all the way on that. But I also think, again, when folks who have lived in the world and seen some things, that even she may not have seen in that way, to be able to hear their experience and acknowledge it. And especially in those times where you have folks grinning and bearing it, or maybe not grinning, but just dealing with it and like, just, all right, I gotta go to work and come home. Like, think about those elders, and he talks about his mom. Like, did his mom come home and complain and download and have a therapy session and all that? No, she takes care of the kids. She does what she has to do. She just keeps going, right? And that's another point about our community. And then that's just a regular, like, that's one level of it. Let's talk about the fact that then you're literally like dodging nooses and beatings and like real true violence, like real crazy terror. And then you want something from that person, but what can they give you, right? Now, ironically and beautifully, Black folks obviously are loving, and we've had love, and we have music and art, and we have all these beautiful things that emerge, but the wherewithal that it takes to do. And I think that's what James is saying. Be sensitive to the fact that everyone either may not have access to that wherewithal, may not have, the tools yet to deal with it. And then we also get to choose and say, well, if I'm on this journey, I'm on this butterfly, emergence, and this other person isn't in that moment, then I've got to make a different choice. I can't necessarily judge where they are, because based on the circumstances, this is never designed for any of us to survive, yet we're still doing it. So there's got to be something said for that. And I think that's what he's trying to get her to see, but she's also trying to get him to see, like, yeah, that's all fine and good. However, there's a bigger, better world. There's more for us than this suffering. And I want to get free of that, and even to the idea, of like, when you talked about, Phil, I think you mentioned about the low paying job, but think about it. Back then, Factory jobs, the city jobs, the post office jobs were amazing jobs. They were top of the line. That was like, if you're a Black person got a post office job, that's major. That's like you've literally made it. You know what I mean? Aside from going to college and, but even those things, folks, think about the numbers of people that had that kind of access. It was literally like going uphill with like a boulder on, I know it's like a Greek tale or whatever, but going up with just like all the boulders trying to achieve anything with the level of oppression they're experiencing. And I think this is not to disregard, our human agency, because we do have it, but I think it is just to say, to be able to be, compassionate to the people who were in the midst of it. And I'll just say this really quickly, real quick. It made me recently, I think it was last year, it was before 2020, maybe 2019, but I guess the year before, but whatever. I remember thinking about, I saw a picture of Nelson Mandela, and I was thinking about like, man, and this is actually pre-quarantine, ironically, but I was just like, wow, I can't even imagine the day to day. Like, we know some of the story, he's written about it. All those years, I can't even imagine. So I had to acquiesce in my mind and give some homage to this man and say, like, you know what? You've been through things I cannot even fathom. So I have to give you a little room to do and say and be whatever you needed to do and say or be. Whether people agree with all the political choices and the this or that, I cannot even imagine. And I need to be clear about that. And I think that's what he's trying to say to her. Just try to imagine that. You really can. So give them a little wiggle room, just a little bit, a little grace.
So I'm glad you brought that up. So juxtaposing that from what was you're saying and what he was saying back then into where we are now, right? I think the tenor of the conversation has changed to where if grace was given, right, we're not necessarily in that moment in time, even though we still should be offering grace to one another to understand experiences and the nuances of experiences. But when we think about, I mean, just to be frank about it, right? Black men feel underappreciated. They feel undervalued right now. During it, I look at your face. See, look, you said all that, and now as soon as I say it 40 years later, Lord, you about to come for me.
I'm listening.
No, but I think it's very real, right? And I find myself pushing back, not because I'm offended, right? But I find myself pushing back at times, on posts and different things to say, hey, we're human, right? We're for some of us, our masculinity is fragile, right? Our ego is fragile. And so, yeah, it's not necessarily your responsibility to coddle us in any way. No, definitely hold us accountable, but don't necessarily hold us hostage. And then make sure that your efforts are pure, right? And I think from what I see, and again, my timeline based on the algorithms is about 4 or 5 people, so I can't speak to the majority of black folk who push back against black men. But I notice in some of the commentary, right, whether it's what took place with Gayle King and Lisa Leslie and Kobe, right? Black men were upset, and it was, you don't have a right to feel upset. Right, and so it's again, this space there doesn't appear to be a space. Hence the reason why you good man existed, because a lot of brothers felt that out here in this world where I am wearing the mask, where I am going home and continuing to wear this mask, I'm not affirmed in any space. So I need to convene with other brothers in order to have that need met. What are your thoughts?
I was going to let Zane go because I know I just got finished speaking. I'll write down my notes so I'll come back to it. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I don't know.
It is not to say. No, I was just going to say, I don't want it to seem like it's an attack on black men. That's what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is I think tolerance is low. And again, the other side, I completely understand why tolerance is low. And so it's this navigating of some real interesting shit.
So that social media space, I'm not sure of. I have real life interactions with people.
Damn, that the shade.
That's shady. I know. I felt that.
That was shady. I didn't mean to be shady. But I mean, I work in a grocery store, so I'm back and forth with people, and then my art group of people are different. But if you were talking about regular folk, just working people, you know what I mean, doing their thing, the male ego. But I don't know if it's so. The two thoughts are clashing in my head right now. What you're saying is clashing. Like, I understand that from our group, that's a necessary thing, that we bond and we're growing. And that group of people in particular, we were looking for something to sort of, understand each other and to support each other. And there was an attempt to grow. But are you saying in that same space that even though we are finding ways to do that we're still stuck?
I was.
I mean, because that's what I feel like. I feel like I don't know where to go with that, because we're doing the things we need to do to get better.
Yeah.
But is everybody stuck?
I wouldn't say stuck, but I don't think the acknowledgement piece is there. That the acknowledgement that brothers are out here working, or if they're not out here working on self, understanding why and offering that grace, due to trauma or environmental circumstances or just sheer stupidity, like Nikki said throughout, right? Like, everybody doesn't get it, and I think for at times the grace isn't necessarily shown. But again, on the flip side, grace can't be shown because people are getting killed, trans women are getting killed. It's people are getting abused. It's so it has to be this urgency of the matter and harshness of the matter, and at times a shame component attached to it. I'm not a believer in shame being used to permanently change behavior, but it's definitely useful at times to stop some harmful shit that takes place. So again, maybe it's just something I'm battling with back and forth, and I continue to try and understand, because part of me is overprotective, like Baldwin. Like, no, I see brothers out here. Like, nah, like, sis, you got to stop. But then it's just like, all right, go hit one of them. You know what I mean? Because it's on that type.
But I feel like it's both and. I think it's all of it, and I think this is where the modern, like, social media version gets tricky, because it'll go like down a rabbit hole of one or the other. It's either this or that. You're either on this camp or not, and it's like it's all of it. You know what I mean? Yes, are there toxic behaviors that human beings can do differently, regardless of gender? Absolutely. We're in a time period where we're being all like propelled and compelled to shift and change in a way in which we're bouncing ideas off of each other more rapidly. It's all happening instantaneously. You hear about this and I hear about, it all happens so quickly. Where before, maybe, folks were in the work mode, or unfortunately our ancestors were in the, enslaved mode, and there was just so much pressure from the outside. We still have outside pressure, but it's different. It is. So needless to say, I think that the note I wrote down for later to come back to was, I was like, I blame romance. Because I was thinking, this is one thing I will say, in watching Nikki a little bit, some of it, I'm like, where does the idea or the desire that this person that you go to is going to do X, Y, or Z for you, even emotionally or energetically, where does that come from, right? And I was like, a lot of that is what has been marketed to us, specifically women. So I think on top of that, and no, that's not true, men and women. So we all, sometimes, depending on if that's the dynamic, if it's a male-female relationship, that dynamic of like, okay, so I'm coming to you for whatever, you're coming to me for whatever. And like, I'm expecting that as a woman, you're going to do this, this, and this for me. Well, I'm expecting this, man, you're going to do this and this for me. But it's like, where are these expectations coming from? So I say that to say that for me, it's that question of like, seeing another person as another person. You know what I mean? Again, regardless of gender. So knowing that if another person's going through grief, that's a real thing. Now, the way they exhibit emotion could look different, right? One person might be like in a club ready to fight and, throw bowls and be drunk and stuff. But the question is, are you grieving? Because that's really the question. The behavior, we can address it. We can say no to it. We can suggest change. We can say, oh, that's unhealthy, it needs to stop or whatever. But like, let's look at this other being as a human being and engage it as such. And I think that's a thing that we aren't really it's not marketed to us to really do, particularly in, again, relationships where we're being asked to have romance, because then it's like, well, you need to do this and I need to do that. And it's a lot of this kind of thing, as opposed to engaging one another with, again, compassion, understanding that you're a human like I am. You have emotions like I do. However way you choose to express them could vary. And if it is not aligned with how I choose to be in the world, I can also say no to you, which is then me saying, or walk away, this is not for me. The idea of going in and trying to change people, again, and I'm speaking specifically on a romantic tip, that's a whole thing. Now, that's one little slice of the pie. Now you mix that with another slice, which is folks who, like to Nikki's point, if you're in the home, you're a child, you witness and experience things either directly or with others that are violent or toxic or whatever, the misogynist or abusive, whatever, and it happens to come from this male energy that is powerful and strong and controlling and whatever, then now that's a personal experience that you have, right? And it needs to be addressed. But then the question is that every man and all men? And if you notice in the conversation, the presentation was that, okay, this is how men are, or this is this energy or whatever. And it's like, well, there's other kinds of men. All men are not like that. People have stories of folks from that era who were loving and gentle and sweet and all those things. So like those stories too. And so I think our job, and the beautiful thing about where we are now, is that we have access to the information in our own family stories, in the records left from the folks before, the music, whatever, to really dig into it and find the nuance. And I think that's the thing that like is crucial for us now, as opposed to very strictly just Gail versus, because the thing about the Gail Lisa thing is that it's not, well, Gail Colby, it was presented as Gail Colby, but Lisa's there too. And Lisa's in there like, that's my brother, I love him. And I'm here in love because that's my family. So now it's not even a fight with me and Gail, it's just clarity, like, sis, like what's going on? You know what I mean? The dynamic wasn't black women versus black men in that instance, because Lisa's with Colby on that. You see what I'm saying? So now it's a difference of ideals. And I think if we can step out of some of that to leave room for just the nuance, it doesn't have to be so gender based. And so now we're bringing all our trauma into the conversation, all their trauma. It's like, no. These are people that disagree and they need to address it. And we got somebody living in the room who says, no, that's my brother and I'm standing for him and that's it. And that's important, regardless of gender, because it's like, no, that's my folks. And so when we talk, be clear, you're going to respect my folks. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, I think with that, it was the idea of, first, the imagery of black men. For there's a certain reverence for like Kobe, for Mike, for because we've been conditioned to view our athletic achievers as the man's man, right? And then we connect with them, especially if we grow up in that era. But I think a part of it was also just feeling like another black man is being attacked, right? And he's not necessarily here to defend himself. Even though I was completely on board with the questioning, because again, Kobe has a complicated legacy from my perspective, right? It's not this, he has, I don't want to say the tale of two lives, right? But you got pre-Colorado and post-Colorado. And you can't divorce one from another, because Colorado helped make the man who became the ultimate family man and this philanthropist and all of these things, who at the verge of losing it all, right? But I think black men looked at it as, okay, here we just have another brother being attacked, somebody that we admire, that we look up to, and it was taken personally, because I know I was on the receiving end of a lot of it, because I said Kobe has a complicated legacy, and that's okay, right? It's okay to have a complicated legacy. And then what you were saying, Steph, I went back to last week's notes, and where Baldwin was talking about just the oppressor. And he said, it's not the world that's my oppressor only, it's not the world that was my oppressor, because what the world does to you, if the world does it to you long enough and effectively enough, you begin to do it to yourself. And, substitute yourself for community or yourself, like people who look like you. You said, they think you think it's important to be white. right? And just how powerful that is in itself.
I think that's the most. I think that's the. Well, I'm sorry. I think that's the biggest. I don't know if it's the biggest takeaway, but that point hit me really strongly. And I think that Stephanie's point about nuanced
Yeah.
conversations is like a major point. And I think going, just jumping around a little bit, when she was using the word hype and she was talking about identity, I also think that that same point she was making about hype, like all of these outside influences that get that you jump on board with. You know what I mean? We jump on board with something that we don't. I think a lot of the shit we do is performative because we want to belong to a group. Because I feel like even straight hard, hardcore dudes who, will bash somebody are different when it's one-on-one. Like if nobody is there, if the circumstances are completely different, people are different because they really understand humanity. But when you are in a group, and this is like an after school special point, you change. It's brought out in the in Moonlight. Like as they show that young man going through his journey, you see the dynamics of crowd and group and how people do things just to fit in. That was so brilliantly portrayed. And I think that's what Baldwin is saying too. And that's what Miss Giovanni is saying too. You know what I mean? She's saying like all this hype and he's saying all these external things. And and I think I'm always looking for the way to try to break through because you see the problems that they're talking about. I see them in myself. You know what I mean? I'm like, oh, I got to work on that. Oh, so a lot of the conversation that I'm fighting, again, like I said, again, is with me trying to be better and get outside of my own traps. You know what I mean? So, yeah, that's my point.
Word. And one last point before we get to the last theme. I felt that was as a therapist, a lot of times we talk about that younger you showing up. And I think when Nikki had that conversation, that was the Nikki who sat and watched her mother and father. Right? That was the 10-year-old, the 15-year-old, the 18-year-old Nikki Giovanni watching her dad. Because what she said, she said something that she likes him. She's like, oh, I definitely wouldn't marry him. Right? And she recognized that, yeah, I love him, but that's not who I envision myself needing to be with. Right? Which goes against what typically happens. Usually you go and find the person that is like your what you were seeking in your father. And so I just thought that was very compelling. And again, her demeanor changed, her tone changed. And again, I think the 20-something-year-old her was present, but she allowed that other aspect of her to show up and show love and be honest and truthful, because maybe she didn't have the opportunity to truly express those feelings to her mom. Like she's speaking on behalf of her mom potentially, right? In that situation. So we just want
that
to.
was so beautiful.
Yeah.
And I would love to know, like, okay, so when, if they watched it or if other family members watched it, what were their thoughts? Because the thing is, people know what's going on. So whether you say it out, that's why she, was like, oh, I love my dad. And, by the way, and you see his smile, it was that knowing awareness. He was like, all right, you don't got to tell me. I know how it goes because this is what I'm trying to tell you. We know what it is. It's all good.
Yeah.
He was like reassuring her, like, I know. And it's genuine. You do. But you also have questions. You also are like, why? It's like that raging against, what you understand to be unfair. And he's also experienced that in his lifetime and in his writings and, all of that kind of stuff. So again, it's more that older to younger knowingness, like, I feel you. But I think it is interesting just watching that whole, the space in which and I think they both are giving voice to things that needed to be said. You know what I mean? Out loud to us and with us and for us. Now, the difference is that for Baldwin, it's like, but I know they're watching. So I want to make sure that we can talk about it, but only to the degree that, they're still watching.
Right.
She was like, I don't even see them. I could care less. It's like, not reality TV, but because it wasn't, that. But it's the point of like, I really could care less, like roll the camera, slice of life. Like it is what it is, because I don't care nothing about them anyway. I don't care about their laws, their structure. I don't care if they want to hire me or not. Like she was so bold and just like, with it. You know what I mean? Which I deeply respect. And I think it's important. And I think, again, now we see it where generations are like, listen, I don't care nothing about it. It's my Instagram. I post what I want. That's a liberation. That's freedom. Yeah. So she's speaking to the freedom that we now see and that we're experiencing, which is like, you know what I mean? 40 some years later.
Yeah. And just a point that I hope is connected. We have these conversations and we don't mention the word class. And I think we don't actually say it, but there's underneath, like when I say masses, you're thinking about people who aren't class, but they are talking about what I'm going to say is middle class, working class, educated people. Nikki Giovanni ain't running into only the junkie. She mentioned Stokely Carmichael. So when we have this conversation, I'm saying, yeah, we talking about class. We also talking about how it affects each class and each. So yeah, I mean, it's not just because you are educated and you have privilege, and this is to your point earlier, doesn't mean that you're immune to any of those issues. It doesn't make you more or less enlightened because you're more or less educated. And I think that's what I was trying to say about when we talk about community, education, all those things matter, but they are spread. The option to do one thing or the other is spread out over all the classes. It's not like this class is better than that class. It may be a more refined version, but you have loving people who are poor, you have loving people who are middle class, you have loving people who are upper class, and you have assholes throughout the thing. And I don't know if what bothers me, I don't know if it's as heavy-handed on the negative side. Yeah, we're affected negatively, but I think our survival and our spirit and our community isn't touted enough. And then I'm gonna go. Can I bring up a point?
Go ahead. Do your thing.
Did y'all notice that when she was talking about junkies, she brought up the topic of junkies, right? And they had talked about sexuality, and he avoided the conversation. He avoided responding to anything about sexuality, and I was like, that's so strange because he's been so bold throughout his entire life. And I was like, why is he not responding? And he didn't really respond until she said the word homosexuality. It was like, yeah, well, I know. And in her mind, I'm thinking for her, I'm like, well, why didn't you respond to that? Yeah. Because the answer to the question was completely something different. I thought she was trying to coax him out to say something that he had said earlier. And he went down this rabbit hole that was avoidance to me. Mm-hmm. That's how I think I wrote it.
It's like, it's funny you say that though, because and that's the thing, I think it's generational. I would imagine, and again, I can't speak, completely for his experience, but I think for Baldwin to even be open out, writing about his journey, his love relationships, like was major. It was such a big deal. So I think it was already like a thing. And I'm wondering for him, because I don't know, and I would love to, I'll say this because I don't know this, how many interviews he has where he discusses, his sexuality more openly, like verbally. I see it more in writing and less in like conversation. Doesn't mean it wasn't happening. I just personally haven't come across it. So I would be curious to know about those kinds of conversations. And
there's the famous one.
Thing? Say that again.
There's the famous one where he's asked, oh, so you were born Black, homosexual, and yada yada. He says, no, I think I hit the jackpot. Like that's the famous response that I remember. Like he became my hero. I remember watching that. I think before I Am Negro came out, there was another documentary, and my father had introduced me to Baldwin, not even just as a writer, when I was young, before I even understood what Baldwin was.
Got you. So, but even that, think about that. It's like, even for, I just wonder about, and I'm with you, Nikki Giovanni she was like, I'm gonna push us into film. Like if we gonna be, and I think, I would wonder, maybe she did expect, because she's like, you're James Baldwin. I know you're free in your mind.
Right.
I want to, like you said, I want to have this conversation. And he's just like, as long as it fits within the realm of all, because Baldwin, I'll say this, think about it. She's saying outright, I don't care about the group and the masses and the, Baldwin absolutely cares. Baldwin's like, no, I carry this whole nation on my back. Everybody's on my back. You, them, it, her, him, my dad, my grandpa. Like, for him, he feels responsible for the whole. And I think because of that, he's navigating everything through that lens. Good, bad, or indifferent for him. It's just like, as long as it fits within a certain narrative, because it's got to stay there, because so far as I know, that's the only way all of us will get there. She's saying, well, if you, me, and whoever else wants to be real free can just go on ahead and be free and forget all of that. And so I'm with you that I think because even when he talks about think about it, he talks about every scenario from a first person perspective, as though he is the man that's married to the woman, when we know that in reality, that's not his life.
Exactly. And he's also stuck. He's stuck because this is where I'm saying, I'm going to use the term ballet, right? So ballet for me is his, like, he's stuck having this conversation with white power. He's stuck having this conversation with white power. She's not having this conversation with white power. You understand what I mean? Like, she's saying, yo, we have power. And he's like, no, because if we say that, like, it's the framework that he's talking about when he says, you think about it long enough and you internalize that shit. Yeah. So his internalized jailhouse is that he feels like he, in that space, that this is my opinion, that he has to have that conversation with white power. He cannot not have that conversation. And I think we all are like that. Like, I feel like capitalism and white supremacy and all those things are things that I feel trapped in. You know what I mean? Like, my wants and my needs are compelled by a media which is controlled. You know what I mean? So to be completely radical, even like local farming, like folk, Chris, yeah. Like, I feel like Chris is so much more liberated mentally, but then there are contradictions in his life that I go, but there's still a contradiction there. You know what I mean? But I look at people who I feel have liberated themselves, and there's always a contradiction.
Well, I think the thing is, but see, for me, I look at it as compromise, and I can't speak to whatever right. That is that you're seeing in that scenario. I'm more so because I love Chris, but and I know you do too. But my point is really just thinking about the compromise, because existence requires compromise. So again, whether we like the thing or not, if it's, we got to fill out the paperwork at the job, you got to do the fingerprints or whatever the thing you need, turn in the thing and the thing. You may not like it or want it or agree with it, but do you compromise in order to achieve whatever the goal is? Yes. And sometimes when the price is too much or the exchange is too much, then you make a different choice. And I think, that's the piece of it. That's the reality. Whether we, again, like it or not, but then we also have the opportunity to recognize, acknowledge that that's what's happening, and then make some changes. You know what I'm saying? But the idea, we use cell phones, we use all these things are compromises. If we say, we want to disengage and unplug and we want our own world and we want to be completely free, what does that really look like? We can do it, but just understanding that that's what it is. And accepting it and being okay with, I've been compromising on these points, but maybe not forever. And here's my exit strategy and plan for that specific compromise. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, because again, I always say we've all been colonized in one form or fashion, right? It's just a matter of in what ways, and again, how much. It reminds me of the video that I play on here often, where again this idea of just getting up and going to Africa. He's like, listen, that ain't the thing. We just want to be able to raise our kids in fucking peace, right? Without no issues, no hassle. And he said, we're either going to live here together or we're going to die here together. You know what I mean? And what's key in that is this idea of together, right? So white folk, that's just what it is. And either you're going to get down or lay down in my Beanie Siegel voice. But when we talk about this idea of being colonized and what you brought up and how we've been compromised, they ended by talking about just the idea, the art, the process of writing. right? And I'm taking it to more so of just being a creative. Because, you know, saying you my favorite Negro dancer, you might be the only one I know. You and Savion. I still remember Savion. But they had that conversation, and I thought it was interesting. One of the things that she brought up, and I wasn't going to start here, but I'm just trying to bring it up.
Did that frustrate you too? That frustrated me.
What?
He couldn't respond to her question.
What question?
The question she said, so can you write about only black people?
And that's what I was gonna go to. Would you ever write something that doesn't include white people? And he said,
the white gays, Toni Morrison's.
Yeah, he said I'm doing it now, right? But he didn't.
It took him 15 minutes to get there. I was like, Mr. Baldwin, she asked you a direct question.
Yeah, and again, it took because he can't, right? I don't think any of us can. Again, outside of just no, I don't think it's possible. I don't.
It is.
You show me how, and I can again our experiences.
Toni Morrison.
Again, our again, it might not be a white character in there, right? But with the type, what we're again that white gaze, that white influence that's come from. If we're talking about strictly characters, of course.
No,
right?
no. But
say it again. No, say it again. Somebody go.
When you don't have to explain references, when you if you listen to Busta Rhymes, right? And he's not explaining references. Like when you listen to people do demonstrative things, when you watch movies where they have to explain what chicken is, all that explanation, it's like us having a conversation and we are never explaining references, right? That's one level of it.
So can I push back against that? Can I push back at level one? Push back at level one. So if we're having this conversation where we talk how we talk, right? We say we be damned if we code switch or isn't that indirectly being influenced by white folk because you feel the need to say, listen, I'm going to be me. I'm going to talk how I want to talk. You're still being influenced some way, right? Maybe not directly, but it's still something unconsciously that in you that's saying, listen, if I'm going to do a song, right, I'm speaking to my people. I'm speaking to my people.
I understand what you're saying. I understand the nature.
That's where I'm coming from.
The nature of living in America and being colonized is that the dynamic is if we're going to say black and white, is black and white, right? So that's the playing field. But do you pander? Do you look for points? You know what I mean? Okay, the dynamic is going to be I'm trying to liberate myself from a thing, right? So if you're saying that we can never undo that dynamic, yes, I agree with you. But inside of trying to undo that dynamic, there are ways of achieving it. Are you pandering? Are you actually going into self, or are you trying to gain points in a world as a strategy?
Now,
go ahead. No, Steph, go ahead.
I was going to say, and I wonder, like, I don't necessarily know that. I don't see Baldwin personally in my. And again, I really need to revisit him a little bit more. And I've read, some of his stuff, but I need to go back and like really spend time with him, honestly. So I don't mix him with others in my mind. But I think about like, I don't necessarily see him as that like the pandering type. I think her point was, can we just completely extract ourselves from this? Like, do we have to always be responding to oppression? Because I think that's really what she's getting at. It's less about the white character being in it and more about the idea of, are we always responding to them, talking to them, and I think she said that very pointedly, because she wanted to, again, after that whole conversation going around ideas, and she's like, listen, I'm tired of talking even to them. Can we talk? And then what does that look like? And would you ever do it in the book? You know what I mean? But I think that, I say that to say though, I think we, again, there's value in us thinking about the world from the perspective of people a little prior to this, who again are living in worlds where there is not a whole bunch of direct interaction with white folks in the way that we have it. So again, if you're in a space where 150, 200 years ago. Someone's enslaving you and they're brutalizing you and your community. You're not interacting. You're not talking to them about nothing. Matter of fact, you really hope they never hear what you got to say for real. Like literally. So our elders, our ancestors were talking to each other all the time. They're not talking to them about nothing. What are they going to talk about? Even some of those early, Black authors. I think we talked about it before with like David Walker's Appeal, because that comes to mind. He talking to us. He like, listen, get up, get to slicing and dice. Do what you got to do. It's to us. It's in the language, but it's not for them. You know what I'm saying?
No. I agree with that point.
Talking to them, because there were folks in those generations talking to them. But the point is, when we think about the Black experience, the African American experience here, that idea of being able to exist in a world where you are searching to speak with each other and be in communion, away from that toxicity that's coming from slavery and brutality. Like, that's a thing. So it's possible and it's been done. And even in that generation, it was happening. And I think that's where the point she's making it. Like, we don't really need to keep trying to explain who we are to people who clearly, like, what's the point of that?
Word.
And I think the other dynamic in there is that, and this is what I was trying to get at, when you're trying to beat somebody at their own game, you do things like you write a Giovanni's room with no Black characters in.
Yeah.
Because you want to say, like, now what?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's a strategy. I don't think it's something that's not thought through, but she was challenging that strategy. She was saying, okay, you've shown them that writing is writing. You know what I mean? You've shown them that I can write. This is what I've learned about writing. This is the pureness of writing. It don't have nothing to do with what you think it got to do with. Now, and then she's saying to him, okay, so Mr. Baldwin, I know you love your people.
Right.
So go ahead and write about them. Be free.
Yeah.
So is it more like because I looked up, because they mentioned a couple books. I saw the one, the mystery novels, the detective novels. Yeah. And so now I'm looking at Tell Me How Long the Train's Been Going, and I guess in seeing what she's saying and just interpreting it from my perspective about that idea again, not writing indirectly to them for their understanding. And writing specifically towards us. And I guess for me, it's the unconscious of, I don't think we could do anything without even a speck of influence without white folk. You know what I mean? I think just where we are. So yeah. See, I think that's relatively it. Shoot, it's just 8:30. A teacher who is not free to teach is not a teacher. To teach in the situation that Black people find themselves in is a revolutionary act. And then when he said, when you think about every tyrant that they couldn't read, but they all burn books, right? And it was just like he good with the quotables, man. he's good with the quotables. I just thought those were just two quotes that I couldn't end without saying, listen, it's been a joy the last 3 weeks to have y'all on. Stephanie is, it's always love. Definitely appreciate you. Listen, y'all don't understand. 3 straight weeks, the sister showed up and showed out, which is always a beautiful thing.
That was shade.
I appreciate you. Zane, as always, thanks for coming through. I think I'm going to have you, the homie Marla, she hit me up today. She got this, I don't know, well, I guess it ain't secret news or something. So she got to see an advanced screening of One Night in Miami yesterday. And then she participated in like a master class with Regina King today. And wow. Yeah, right. That was my face too. Like, damn, where was? I mean, you called me after the fun go down. You could have put me on 3-way. You know what I mean? Had me up in the building. But she talked about how watching the movie and how like this idea that we have of people, of Malcolm X, of Muhammad Ali, we don't necessarily know Cassius Clay, right? Like we revere Malcolm, we revere Muhammad Ali, and so it just offered some insight, albeit fictional, some fictional things in it, but just about black men and how, the thinking and how they're showing up and why it's necessary for groups like hashtag you good man. So that's why she brought it up to me, because I was thinking about letting
it is necessary, like hashtag you good man, Phil.
I was thinking about letting it fall by the wayside. Heavy as that.
We haven't met in like 5 years.
We haven't, but that. It ain't been that. It's been a little bit, but not. So I know next Monday I'm gonna watch it. I'm gonna get some brothers together. I know Greg Corbin got a book that's on the way out, so it'd be dope to have you come through there so we could dissect the movie. And yeah, the hashtag You Good Man group will return next week. Lord willing, whatever Lord you want to put in there. So listen, I appreciate those of you who tuned in. I will be back tomorrow with Gabriel Bryant, aka Gabriel Prosser, who has an album. I didn't even know the brother rapped. But it's like anything I could do to. I know he's on the ground, right? Like when we talk about folk in the ground, on the ground, like he's really in the streets, and anything I could do to support him and his album, I will do. So tune in tomorrow at 7:00 for that conversation. Until next time, peace.